Are we ready to go? Okay, it is 6:04, May 1st, P and Z meeting. I'd like to bring it to order, and we'll start with roll call.
Mike Rhodes.
Jeannie Nyer.
Michael Hall.
Jerry Fleming.
Dave Bench. And Consul.
Charlie Zay.
Thank you. And we'll move right on to the consent agenda. Or I should ask for, are there public comments that need to be considered before we move on?
We do have, Jay signed up for his later item.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, very good. I don't hear myself. Is it working? Okay.
Yep.
So, I'll call up the consent agenda. All we have on there are the expertly crafted minutes that I'm sure that everybody's had a chance to enjoy. Do I have a motion?
I move that we accept the minutes of the P&Z meeting.
Okay.
Okay, I second.
Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. Any discussion around it? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Ayes carry. All right. We will now move on to presentations. And this evening, we're going to get an overview and discussion of proposed code change amendments and associated rezoning to implement the comprehensive plan. Do we have anybody out there who wants to speak to this? Oh, that's lovely.
Mr. Chair. Brooke Brown, 307 Nixon Drive. Members of the commission, as you know, I was a member of the comprehensive task force who worked on preparation of the comprehensive plan, and upon adoption of that plan, have worked with a group of three, along with Bryce Cox of Charlie's firm and Charlie on occasion, to draft up in ordinance form the changes that are contained within the comprehensive plan. And that is the Exhibit A document you have before you. And you probably already also know that because these plans entail zoning changes in part, it's necessary to have a report from the Planning and Zoning Commission, a public hearing, which we had last week, and a report from Planning and Zoning before those changes can be considered by the City Council. So under the current schedule, there's tonight's meeting. There's also a meeting next Wednesday night scheduled for Planning and Zoning to give you time to vote out a report on this exhibit to the City Council. And I'm here tonight to give a brief overview because I gave a full overview last week, and to see what questions, concerns, changes, recommendations there might be, and if I can answer any questions on this draft. The way I have thought about doing that is to briefly go through the major changes that this recommendation would entail for zoning purpose, the zoning changes that this recommendation would entail. Those consist of changes in the setbacks and height requirements for commercial properties. Perhaps even as important, we are combining proposed combining the residential and the office uses and retail uses, so that anyone that currently has an office property can also use that property for retail uses, and anyone that has a retail property can also use that property for commercial uses. So that would be a very big benefit for our commercial district. There are also significant reductions in setback requirements if certain conditions are met, those conditions being the dedication of property along the back side of of commercial properties on the north side of Bee Caves Road along Eanes Creek for a dedicated walking path or trail. Some requirements with respect to an increased impervious cover limitation, a reduced impervious cover limitation for all commercial properties if certain conditions are met, those being conditions that would not increase the rate or flow of drainage from the property, which could be met through either green building practices, retention, and other sorts of assisted development that retains water and doesn't just where the impervious cover does not increase the drainage requirements or obligations of the city. There are also an update to the current lighting standards. Our existing lighting standards refer to neon lighting, which is not in vogue at this time and not used. So we've updated both the allowable types of lighting, the style of signs that can be used, and also are asking that developers use fixtures and intensities of lights that are in conformance with dark skies principles. So those are the major changes. There's also a change in the standards with respect to tree protection. Today, we have no tree protection in the commercial corridor. This would require protection of the same protected species that exists under our residential ordinance, and in addition would require additional permits to be issued before a tree 12 inches or greater could be removed. Those conditions are set out in the ordinance. I can walk through those if people have if you have questions about it. And then there also is a very stiff standard for removal of any heritage tree, which is defined as a tree or clusters of trees within a certain diameter of each other if that cluster or the tree is 24 inches in diameter or greater. Along with that, along with the additional permitting for tree removal, there is a credit to be given for trees that are preserved, protected species that are preserved against other landscaping requirements. So we're giving both a stick and a carrot with respect to trees, protected species trees, and we're also asking in this ordinance, the changes in this ordinance would also require, as property is redeveloped, moved closer to Bee Caves Road, that there be the landscaping standards are being changed so that it's not just shrubs and trees for a 20-foot border between the street and the parking lot. Now we're asking for trees along sidewalks adjacent to public rights of way. So that is the change there. No shrubbery would be required with respect to with respect to redeveloped property. We've maintained the current landscaping requirements for existing commercial properties. There are some there as between commercial properties and what is currently a 100-foot green belt across the back of the properties along the north side of Bee Caves Road. Under the new ordinance, that 100-foot green belt would be reduced to a 75-foot green belt. There would be no required landscaping between buildings, and the emphasis would be on some trees in the parking areas and some trees along sidewalks. So I think that covers in a broad view what this new ordinance would do. I'm happy to answer any questions. Just call on me as you choose. This part of the agenda is not set up for public discussion, but I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you might have now, or for commission discussion, but I'm happy to answer any questions, and I'll be around, so if you want to hold those till the discussion portion of the agenda, happy to do that too.
Does anyone here have any questions for Ms. Brown?
We're gonna close this and then go to a discussion portion? Is
We
that-
will go to a public discussion whenever we decide if we're gonna vote on this. Right now, we're in a presentation stage, where she's just kind of giving an overview of what's coming. So
Okay.
we can, if you have questions, this is a good time to ask
It's a
them.
good time.
I think
Yeah.
at this time too, Mr. Chairman, if you wanna call up agenda item 4 to be discussed in conjunction, then you can do all of the discussions and questions if you'd like.
Okay, that sounds like a good idea. We can consolidate a little bit. I'm gonna call up agenda item number 4, discussion and possible action regarding an amendment to the city's Code of Ordinances, Part 1, Chapter 24, Signs and Advertising, and Part 2, Chapters 101, Buildings and Construction, 103, Environmental Protection and Control, and 107, Zoning, related to aligning the city's codes with the recommendations in the city's comprehensive plan for the commercial corridor and other matters in connection therewith. I'm going to open up for public hearing here, if there is anyone out there in the public who would like to make comment.
Sure, so, we don't necessarily need a public hearing, but we can have absolutely public comment
Well,
or
it did,
discussion,
I
sure.
thought I heard someone say that we had
no.
some people signed up.
Jay, you're talking about trees, okay. We don't have anybody signed up currently to speak.
All right, okay, then I misunderstood.
Okay.
All right, very good. So, Mike.
Question time?
Yeah, go.
Question time? All right, I just wanted, I actually have a lot of questions. Well, I guess I want to understand the process we have here. So we are going to discuss tonight and then come back in a week and discuss one more time, and then it goes to council. Is that correct? Did I mishear that?
We actually have the power to take this today. We can save ourselves a trip next week if we review and approve this for sending up to city council this evening. So, the
Okay.
answer is, yes, we do need to come back next week unless we approve it today.
But if we discuss things that necessitate changes, we have the expectation that that's gonna all happen in 1 week.
Right, so, well, if you were to discuss some items today, so what we're talking about is this draft Exhibit A, so this is all the language. If you discuss today some changes that you would like made, we can do it either way. We can talk about the changes and you can say we wanna pass it on to council with the changes we recommended, or you can let us know what the changes are. We can go back and make the document changes and bring it back to you at your next meeting, which would be next week. So basically, we've allotted these 2 meetings, this week and next week, to spend all the time getting any language changes, any amendments you wanna see made, and that will be sent on to city council as your recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission.
To that point, I'm sure you're aware of Jerry Fleming's recommendations with regard to specific changes in the lighting ordinance, and more or less to bring them up to date. And we could include, with a motion to approve, the adoption of those changes at the same time. And they would go up to city council as a complete document with those changes in place. We just had a little bit of discussion around this before the meeting here.
Those are
and-
changes to
yeah.
what to this that we received and went over last week.
Yes.
Yes, in the packet, there are, some red lines shown for that section that he's proposed, the lighting section.
Are there red lines from what we got last week? Are they already in here?
It's a separate document, so what you have last week is what we proposed. Now attached in the packet, I can pull it up on the screen, is a request
Is-
from
okay.
a member
So-
to consider some
Okay, I
further amendments.
wasn't aware of that.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, we can print a few of those. We'll print one for each person if that's a good idea.
Okay.
Okay.
Other questions?
It just seemed,
Oh.
sorry.
The document that was listed under item 4, City of Rolling Wood, lighting ordinance draft markup, those are Jerry's changes to Exhibit A for composite draft. So it's 2 separate documents. For the lighting section.
In item 4,
Where?
where does it say that?
Do you see item 4, you see the document City of Rolling Wood, LTG ORD draft markup?
It was the attachment in
Yeah, it doesn't actually show up on the printed page here, but,
Just curious.
but you saw it last week because I saw you see it.
Well, I saw this and I followed along really well, but you know.
All right.
Okay, yeah, it sounded, I guess from my perspective, I know there's been so much work that's gone into it, but I don't know when we last talked about the high level sort of policy idea behind this document. Was it what, a year ago maybe? It's been
Probably longer than that.
a long time.
Yeah.
So it seems interesting to take a year to get this and then push it through in a week. You know, for us to kind of go through in 1 week seems, I'm just curious why we are going so.
I don't know, I immersed myself in it yesterday all day, and I could probably recite it backwards now, and
We
Um,
actually had it a couple of weeks.
This is,
I know, but I mean, it just seems like, I was like, wow.
it's just a
okay,
matter,
we're
it's
gonna
just
do
a
it
matter
real
of
fast.
cracking open a beer and,
Hey, you know,
knocking it
I'm
out.
it was just understanding the landscape.
Okay.
You know?
putting on my city council hat, the city council had this on their agenda on April 17th along with the exhibit. It was posted for the joint hearing that was a week before last week, for the joint hearing that was held between the planning and zoning and the city council. So the documents you see under number 2, presentation, are the same documents that were posted last week for the joint hearing. In addition, under item 4, shortly after or at the joint hearing, Jerry had marked up the lighting section and circulated those documents to Ashley. And that's a 2-pager that's under item 4, which is Jerry's markup to the lighting section of Exhibit A. And so about a month ago, or at Planning and Zoning, or maybe it's been 2 months, we talked about the schedule for these meetings. So I think we've all been apprised that it was going to be a big workload, and this is what it's going to be, and here it is.
Yeah, I might have missed the meeting where we discussed this schedule, so I don't know. It's interesting.
I'd just like the record to reflect that Jerry's handwriting is incredible.
Impeccable. He
Yeah,
must have been an architect. or
I just
engineer.
confirmed on the side he's an engineer. And
I
it shows he's got that precise handwriting that you would expect and appreciate. So thank you, Jerry, for that.
I appreciate it.
all right. I do have one question for Ms. Brown, and that is that, you know, given the big bite that we were just discussing there, there's quite a bit here. And it is a bit of a challenge to get through it all and then take it and try to approve it all in one stroke. If you had to do it again, would you do it the same way?
No, I wouldn't. And that is, you're right. There's been more than a year since the comprehensive plan was approved. And so part of that has been it's taken about a month at a time to approve the changes for each one of these policies that have come along. And by the time, you know, I do understand it's a large task, but we've tried to be as public and as prepared as we could be in presenting this to y'all. So it is a large task. I think it's better handled. My judgment now is it's better handled in smaller chunks than as one large package. And I wish we had done it that way. We didn't, but we've learned from that, and that's my take on it.
Thank you.
And the other thing, we did not get Bryce involved early enough. He was not involved at the time of the actual discussions before within the comprehensive plan task force, and so he came to it a bit cold, and that took a little bit of time to understand kind of exactly what the feeling was, what the intent was, what the circumstances were behind the policy, and all the discussions that had gone on around it. So I think getting the drafting ordinance drafting done consistent with coming up with the changes is a good idea. It's better than what we have tonight, I would say.
Thank you for the hard work on all that.
Yeah,
Thank
We
you.
appreciate it.
Any other questions for Ms. Brown, or, now, as it says, you know, this is a discussion and possible action. We actually can act on this evening. Of course, that would require a motion. But, you know, you have seen this thing, the overview the other day. We're back here, Ms. Brown has presented maybe an abbreviated version of the same thing. You've all had a chance to look at the 56-page document, and I couldn't put it down. You know, it was such a page turner. And so we have the authority to approve this evening, or we can wait until next week at that the meeting that is scheduled for that. So, any ideas on this? Any discussion?
Yeah, can we discuss some more?
I'm sorry?
Can we discuss a little more?
You bet.
Okay, so, and Brooke, we had, I think, talked about this last meeting, and you emailed me today. Sorry, I saw it on my phone. I was in meetings all afternoon, but I'd like to understand the impervious cover restrictions, especially in the context of existing impervious cover. And I think, you know, I got your note, and it sounded like, I'm paraphrasing and working from memory, but you know, these have been around. These restrictions have been the same since '87, something to that effect. But I'm very curious to know if we have any of these properties that exceed the maximum allowable impervious cover that folks are getting in these new restrictions.
I have done my best to answer that question. The current 50% impervious cover limitation was enacted at least as early as 1987 and hasn't changed since then. I've talked to, so we know that that's been the standard since then. According to Tom Farrell, he can think of perhaps only one property that may exceed it, and that would be the property that is Rolling Woods Center number 2 near Walsh Tarleton, an office building near that corner at Walsh Tarleton. There there are PUDs that have some varying impervious cover limitation, but they wouldn't be included in these zoning changes. And so the 50%, we are maintaining the 50%, the existing impervious cover requirements, unless there is a commitment to these green building practices, you know, the either some form of retention or green roofs or other practice that would offset the increased drainage from the reduced impervious cover percentage. So there's an opportunity under the new proposal to go up to 60%, have up to 60% impervious cover, but the developer would be required to offset it and also to give the dedication of the property along Eanes Creek. So it doesn't reduce anyone's impervious. It doesn't reduce the current. It gives an opportunity for an increased impervious cover limit with conditions.
Right, but we're not certain that we don't have any commercial properties that exceed even the six. I think because they can go up to 60%, right?
From the one who knows best, there's one property that may exceed that currently. Everything else has been developed after 1987. The things developed after 1987 have met that requirement with the possible exception of that building in Tom's knowledge. And the properties that were developed before then, there's not been a record or a way to identify that impervious cover limit. But there would not be, you know.
And do we know when and how many of these properties have drainage infrastructure, detention ponds, et cetera? When that came into play, did that come into play in '87, or was that something that occurred later?
I would say it came later. I haven't researched that question. I know that the properties that are at the western end of Rollingwood Drive and the Palisades property are still on septic fields because they could not, there wasn't a way to connect them to the new sewer system at the time. And so there probably are restrictions on those properties because they're still on a septic system. So I don't know, there's not been a way to, there's not a record. I think Tom tried to do this back when the comprehensive plan was under consideration to find a way to get the lot size versus the impervious cover, but there's not a record that identifies actual impervious cover for any commercial property. So that is where we are.
So I think, you know, correct me if I'm wrong and probably excuse a little ignorance, but my recollection and understanding was that, you know, we went through this endeavor because the neighborhood was keen on redeveloping this corridor, right?
That is part of it.
So I'm putting on my developer hat, or these property owners, and the thing that's going to incentivize development probably more than anything is going to be impervious cover.
I think that's a judgment call. You know, we had developers on the committee. We had Tom, who's a developer. We had input from the community. We had a member of Rollingwood Chamber of Commerce on the task force. And the notion, the reduced setback, and the allowance for the additional uses was thought to be a considerable incentive for redevelopment. And the notion that these properties could be made more pedestrian friendly through the pedestrian trail was also a consideration. And we did not hear any developer or other person saying this is, you know, we won't redevelop our property unless we get a higher than 60% opportunity for impervious cover. We did not hear that.
So it's just a question, are we restricted, like, as a city, because of our watershed, how much impervious cover we can allow folks to have? Or is that just
We are restricted in zoning to the impervious cover policies in the comprehensive plan. Our zoning code is required by state law to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. And so these particular provisions of the comprehensive plan are in Comprehensive Plan Policy 11.
11, what page is that?
11 and 12. If you're looking at the summary I did, it's page 3. I don't have the full comprehensive plan in front of me right now.
I do.
Okay. These are the,
sorry, you said page 11?
I'm talking about it's policy 11 and 12. And that's in the summary I prepared and was distributed before the joint meeting,
Oh, that's,
posted the Friday before the joint meeting last week.
comprehensive. The summary of the comprehensive plan code revisions, is that what you're referring to?
Yes, and if you'll turn to page 3, you'll see in the middle of the page, Comprehensive Plan Policy 11, and then Comprehensive Plan Policy 12. The bolded language is directly from the comprehensive plan, and so the ordinance changes need to be consistent with that policy.
Okay, so I mean, regardless of any discussion tonight, we're capped at that because that plan exists and we can't exceed that.
If you want to move to change the comprehensive plan, then that's another, that avenue is the avenue to change the policy.
And of course, we had that opportunity a little over a year ago.
Well, it goes back, I think that's why I'm having this discussion again. We talked about this a year ago.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I brought this same issue up a year ago before it went to council, and here we are a year later. And so, I guess the ship sailed. I don't know.
The ship sailed on this until the comprehensive plan is changed.
What is your concern, that it's too much or too little, or?
Well, my concern is
Can I, before just so I understand the dynamic between these things, if we want to implement something, it has to be tied to the comprehensive plan, but we don't necessarily have to implement something? Is that the distinction? Do I understand that right? Like it has to come from everything has to come from a comprehensive plan policy?
Any zoning change that's made must be consistent with the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
We've gone, if you want to backtrack from the comprehensive plan, then you would do that by asking the council to institute a new task force to revise the comprehensive plan.
Okay. But we don't have to implement each piece of it.
Well, that's a policy decision on your part. I think there's, you address that the way you feel comfortable as a city
Oh, yeah,
representative. Yeah.
I was just trying to understand the framework for it, that's all. So thank you it's very complicated. You do a good job of explaining it. So thank you. Sorry, Mike, I didn't want to jump in.
No,
I wanted to understand
I guess
what
what
we
I-
can or
I
can't
guess
do
what I
before
didn't-
we start talking about what the different provisions are. So
yeah, no, I didn't understand that we were capped, I guess, on a policy requirement that was adopted after we discussed it last time, even though we might have brought something up. It was adopted by council, and so we have to
We're
work
bound
within that.
by it.
We're bound by that framework, it sounds like.
And you're,
It was also adopted by the planning and zoning and recommended for approval to the council. There were some changes that were made by P&Z, but it was approved. It was recommended for approval.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was thinking, is we had the opportunity to enforce a change to the comprehensive plan whenever we discussed this a year ago, and evidently that just didn't happen.
Do you remember this discussion about?
No, I don't remember
Discover?
that. I don't remember this piece. No, I remember some other
you
things,
bringing
but
this
no.
up, yes.
I mean, it was more sort of a question, are we gonna be able to affect this? And my understanding was it was gonna come back in this form and then we would discuss it. But
Okay.
perhaps I missed that if we set an upper limit then, that we were gonna be bound to it effectively. Is that accurate?
Charles, you
We-
were gonna, oh, go
no,
ahead,
this,
bro.
I'm sorry, go
I-
ahead.
Did you have clarification that you were going to provide?
Well, I was just gonna say, I was just a reminder that this is a recommending body. You can make whatever recommendation you'd like to make to city council. Ultimately, city council is going to approve whatever it is the city council approves based on your recommendations.
I see.
So you're not
if-
bound by anything as a body. You can make
Because ultimately, we don't do anything except.
I disagree with that, but I
I'm
understand
being
where
a
you're
little
coming
bit
from.
tongue-in-cheek,
Yeah, I
but
know what you mean. Yeah.
So if we were to say disagree with, as Mike's pointing out, maybe this aspect of the policy is not something that we support, we could
You could-
propose to city council to do something different on that. So
Absolutely, and you
The
can
ship is not
recommend something different. You can
But
absolutely do that.
what I'm hearing is if we said we think the impervious cover should be higher. I'm just speaking for myself, but assuming this body did that, really it has to go back to redo the comprehensive plan to then make a change to this zoning document.
Yeah, if it's not consistent with the comprehensive plan, a change to the comprehensive plan would have to be made. But that's not an impossibility. Like you can make changes to your comprehensive plan all the time. Folks do it all the time. So I think that you should, as a body, debate these issues, make your recommendations as you feel appropriate, and leave process to city council and myself to make sure that if they decide to invoke one of your recommendations, we will go through the appropriate process to make that change.
Is it only the number
That's helpful, thank you.
that's in question here? Is it the 55% or what?
You know, I feel like for a relatively urban commercial zone,
Mhm.
and I'm not a developer, certainly not a commercial developer, it's a low number for this environment, and it's not, in my opinion, I don't think it's very stimulating to redevelopment, especially if that's where people are at, and especially if you have properties that are currently developed without water quality, without detention ponds, because those things happened, these developments happened before we had those ordinances. I don't think you're gonna stimulate a lot of redevelopment.
Okay.
And that's just my opinion. I could be wrong, but that's my guess.
So we just moved the needle by 5%, I guess, or that's what's being discussed here.
Well,
do you have
and we don't have an idea if there's someone at 65%.
Yeah,
Are we
well, I
gonna,
guess
gonna grandfather them? It doesn't,
I guess that's
appear
my
that we
question
are.
to
Maybe
you.
that's a
Is
state
there,
law
is,
thing,
is
but-
there a right number that you like better or what?
I'm just mainly curious how we got to that number.
Okay.
You know, how did we end up here? And you know, I know when it came up before, I brought this up and wasn't real firm about it because I felt like we had another bite of the apple. So
And we're not
No, I don't-
experts on the subject of what is it that motivates a commercial developer to do it, right? Like,
And
it'd
I
be
don't,
interesting to
I
hear
don't want to
from-
hold myself out as an expert, but I think I know enough to know that generally speaking, that's maybe the most valuable part of the equation for them. That
is the
parking,
buildable land.
yeah, how much can I put here, right?
Hmm.
And so I think if we're trying to stimulate development, then that's, you know, it's a very meaningful, if not the most meaningful part, in my opinion.
All right. Well,
I remember. I feel like in the same context we were talking about, like, could we give some flex on the front setback, like the Bee Cave Road frontage setback, just because we wanted to increase the amount of buildability without putting it closer to the residential zones. I remember having that discussion, but I too don't remember if we ever got more data on that
Yeah.
or insight. I'm not a developer.
well, the whole point
I
here
don't
is
know
that
anything about it.
we are
The-
trying to get comfortable with all this.
Just to make sure you understand, we're reducing the setback on the front end.
Yeah.
It's currently 25 feet from the text dot right away or the property line. We're reducing that from 25 feet to 5 feet.
To 5.
Yeah, I saw that, and I saw we've got other provisions too, like eliminating the parking spots and some of that
Exactly.
stuff. And I think to your point, though, you're like the biggest lever from a developer's perspective is the impervious cover restrictions, or you're speculating that might be.
I'm speculating that that's the biggest part, and I'm also speculating that if you have a property that's 50% impervious cover and you can take it to maybe 55 or 60, but you have to put in a detention pond, a water quality pond, all of which that you don't currently have, that's not going to be very stimulating.
Right, that comes with a lot of cost.
Comes with a ton of cost.
Yeah.
And I think I mean, I love moving buildings to the street. I think that's great. But I think the practical effect also is that when you push the parking to the back, you have more drive aisles, which means that you have more impervious cover to get behind the building where you're going to park, which it makes it a little harder, and we've limited height and so you're not parking under anything. It's going to be surface parking, and so, you know, it just it doesn't strike me as a something that's going to be perceived by those property owners as oh, this is awesome, like let's go for this. I'm really happy to redevelop now.
Well, how many properties actually would be redeveloped? I mean, I don't see I don't see very many properties that would be affected by this. Because most of them, like the Trader Joe's is pretty
Well, that's
much
a PUD.
permanent.
That's a PUD.
Right,
So the
okay.
big ones go through a different process, which
But
Bryce
it's
can
still,
probably
to my
explain.
question, I mean, how many does this actually affect?
well, it's all of these hatched properties.
Blue and light
No,
blue.
no,
blue
no,
and
I know,
teal.
no, that's not my question. My question is, how many would potentially be redeveloped?
I
How
think
many
like
of them look like they could
Like-
be redeveloped? A lot of them.
yeah, the Chinatown shopping complex has come up a couple of times. I
The
think
Palisades is pretty aged out structure.
Yeah.
I think I think the hope was that they were going to be redeveloped into a different environment, right? That was one of the policy
Well-
objectives.
Well, do we know what it would be for, say, instance, Westlake Hills, what the difference would be there as far as the impervious cover? Do we know?
good question, Dave.
I don't know off the top of my head if
Yeah.
you know off the top of your head. So
I know we did look at all of that
Yeah.
and all of the surrounding communities when we came up with the recommendation that was adopted in the comprehensive plan.
Okay.
I don't remember the number right
yeah,
now.
if the commission will permit me, I want to maybe help frame this a little bit so that we can kind of think about the various aspects, because there's a lot of really good points being brought up. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Bryce Cox. I'm a planning consultant with Rampage Law, assisting with this project. So there are a lot of pieces to this puzzle, right? To development, to redevelopment, to the point of how many properties will actually redevelop, to the point of impervious cover being an important thing that people do look at. There isn't going to be a singular point in any of this that is the make or break, right? It's a collective piece that creates this equation of kind of getting there for commercial development. The other thing that I will also remind everyone with all of our development codes is they are living documents that we have to change periodically and recalibrate. You know, we may not always get completely there to everybody's opinion, and hey, we could always do more, et cetera, or maybe go a little further. However, one of the things that I always encourage folks and commissions and councils to think about is, are we doing better than what we currently have? And is this a step in that direction that we want to see as the community? Because we can see how this works, and if it's not working, city can always come back, revisit it, and just do minor tweaks. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We don't need to do a full-blown, task force and redo all of the hard work that's been done. We can just do minor tweaks in those places that need to be done. To the point of impervious cover, and I will definitely say that one of the recommendations that I think is very insightful out of the committee, and I do want to give a special thanks really quick to Councilmember Brown as well as Tom Farrell and Ryan Clinton for their participation in this project, because it has been a lot of their time to get to that point. So I also appreciate y'all's volunteering your time as well. But one of those pieces to impervious cover that we think about is parking, especially surface parking. That is a huge suck of impervious cover, right? An average parking space at 10 by 20, which is like the more suburban. I think we've got a little smaller allowance in town at 9 by 18. That's 200 square feet per space, plus drive aisle. Minimum drive aisle for two-way parking is probably going to be 24 feet. I mean, it adds up quick.
Sure.
So one of the recommendations out of the committee is to look at eliminating parking requirements and letting the market sort that out. And to the point of, how do I know which properties may redevelop? You could have all of them, you could have none of them. It's a very complex equation of the right developer, the right funding, the right market condition, and what we think is okay this year may be completely different next year. The pandemic made crazy things happen in our world when it comes to development and how we think about things. And so I mentioned all that to say these are great conversations, and there's a lot of different aspects that can help kind of pull a little bit of this, the impervious cover piece, the parking piece, the bringing the setbacks forward, right, in beefing up some of the landscape buffering and also reducing the 100-foot setback, for example, or 100-foot buffer from residential properties down to 75. You know, there's a lot of good pieces that work holistically, and I will say absolutely in my professional planning opinion that this is a much more enticing code than your current code for commercial development in my experience. So thank you for permitting me to give a little spiel real quick.
Thank you, Bryce. Okay.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Bryce.
Yeah. So. Absolute, please.
So Sarah Hudson, 2805 Rockway. Also to be considered in the impervious cover limits is the fact that we are on the recharge zone, the Barton Springs recharge zone. So there are aquifer limits. I was trying to find the rules and I can't get it called up on my phone. But I'm not sure if there are any restrictions because we're in the recharge zone on what we're allowed to do. And we also need to consider the drainage because we already have Bee Cave Road that gets crossed, you know, flow getting, crossing the road during heavy rains, and we have to barricade that. Edge Grove gets blocked off. You know, we've had floods at the Mopac and Rollingwood Drive intersection, which is technically not in Rollingwood, but that's how we get in and out of the neighborhood. So the impervious cover limit that we allow for the commercial properties does impact the drainage that we have to be able to handle as well.
Right. And I guess in the commercial corridor, it's not subject to the same, the DCM, the Drainage Criteria Manual, that is applied to the residential area, is it? It's a different thing. Is that true?
I don't remember if that, when we did the DCM, we were focusing mostly on the residential
That's
because
right.
there was an impervious cover limit for the commercial properties. There is not an impervious cover limit
Yeah.
for the residential, so.
Well, I know that TCEQ goes into a different set of rules whenever you get into a commercial area, but it's been a few years since I read all that stuff, and I don't know what the number is that they but your point is a good one.
Yeah.
That, you know, it's not just us, there are other things that we have to take into account, our positioning on the Edwards Aquifer and so on, so
Right.
We may be limited to what we're allowed to do regardless.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
I was saying I don't know if we have a TCEQ restriction for it. I know that there
Yeah.
are some restrictions, but you know, if you take a property that's 50% cover and no detention pond,
Right.
well, you know, you'd be better off with 80% cover and a water quality pond and a detention pond.
Yeah.
So, you know, I don't know that that's necessarily an improvement.
Yeah.
Especially if
I-
it's new and
Especially if it's new
Being
and
renovated.
you got nothing right now except a dirty parking lot running into a stream, you know, which is what we have a lot of.
I can review this question, but I believe that commercial redevelopment is subject to the TCEQ water quality and runoff rules, just like a residential property is. And so properties that haven't redeveloped since those rules were adopted would not have that today and would not be able to do what they're doing today if it were redeveloped. And so I would say my judgment call, but I'll investigate this further, is that these additional green development requirements are not going to be that big a step above what it would otherwise be required by TCEQ if a property that doesn't have current drainage is redeveloped.
I 100% agree. I think they are probably very close to what TCEQ requirements would be anyways.
Yeah. So, is there gonna be any more, Ms. Brown, are we talking about looking at something from the TCEQ, or we're just gonna?
I'm sorry,
we're
what
just- is there gonna be any additional investigation to see whether or not how this lines up against the TCEQ, or?
I think the question I was raising was,
Yeah.
under current state law, which is TCEQ
Sure.
requirements, are those requirements which require that stormwater runoff be of a certain quality and rate of flow, are those requirements applicable to commercial properties in Rollingwood? So that if they are, then the additional obligations that would go along with raising an impervious cover limit to 60% would be parallel to, or would those additional requirements in some part be addressed be required under TCEQ in any event,
Yeah.
whether you were developing at 50% or 60%?
Do we have any more discussion here? All right. Now, going back, are we comfortable enough with what we have here that we can take a motion on moving it forward to city council? Or do you want to take another week and consider it some more and we just come back next week and
When we-
consider our vote then?
We're talking about item 4, right? So
Yes,
when we
we are.
say sending this up to city
Mhm.
council, that's it's this binder clipped
Yeah.
draft,
Mhm.
chapter 24,
Mm-hmm.
and then this is just our sort of guidepost summary. It's a
Mhm.
summary at the top. Okay. And would this also include Jerry's revisions on the lighting thing, or is that a separate item? I'm just trying to understand
Well,
what's
we just
contemplated by.
mentioned a few seconds ago, what can happen is I know that the group that put this together is comfortable with the recommendations that Jerry has made. And
The group
a
that put
motion-
this together.
yes,
Okay.
a motion could be made to approve this package the way that it's written with the proviso that the recommendations that Jerry has made would also be included in that. So that would be what goes to city council.
Thank you for explaining all that. That's helpful.
I'm doing my best.
Well, it's it's sometimes like, I guess to our city attorney's credit, he pointed out like sometimes you don't have to worry so much about the procedure. You can just figure this out and they'll. But
Yeah.
it's helpful to kind of understand what the things that we're supposed to decide are on.
So I'm gonna ask again, do we wanna move forward with this, this evening, or move on to the next agenda item? I need a
I
motion
mean-
if we're gonna move forward.
If the idea is that there's other things in here that I see that I'm still kind of interested in discussion on, but I don't want to retread if everybody's already discussed a lot of these provisions.
You weren't at the joint
Yeah.
meeting. Were you at the joint
I
meeting?
was not. Unfortunately,
Okay,
my
yeah.
flight didn't get back in time.
Yeah, I got that, yeah. Okay. I wasn't there either.
Yeah.
Well, I think it was
yeah.
more of a presentation. I wouldn't call it a discussion at the joint
Yeah.
meeting per se,
But you
which
had
was
the
a great presentation.
But you did
by
have
the
the
way. That was-
opportunity to ask questions, you did.
And there
So-
were three
Yeah.
very
No, it was,
comprehensive presentations going through this in detail.
yeah, it was incredibly helpful.
And then, I personally have spent a lot of time going through it and going back to the comprehensive plan to find the citations. I have no objections, to moving forward tonight. I mean, I've done my homework,
Yeah.
so I'm ready
Right.
to vote to accept it.
To me, I don't see anything that is out of line with what we approved last year. You know, we talked about this, there were presentations made, we had an opportunity to question. I know that changes had been made, I don't recall what they are, but there had been some changes made to the comprehensive plan and then what followed after that based on input from P&Z. And, you know, I look at it and say, yeah, feels about right. So I'm gonna ask again. If we're not comfortable, we can come back and you take another week and, you know, spend some time and look at it and we can
Yeah,
discuss
I
it
mean,
some more.
I'm happy to kind of talk about some of the things that jump out at me. I guess I'd say this, that right now I probably would appreciate the extra week.
Okay.
But I also don't want to hold things up if the rest of the group is interested in getting things back. So, you know, I think we've done such great work here. I know it's taken like a year to get to this point, but I think it was done
Yeah.
year plus.
Yeah.
But it was done the right way. I think we got, you know, a lot of community input on it. I do recall us, you know, putting some input in ourselves a year ago. I think there's probably some devil in the details on some of it, but I like that we did this all as like a complete package and we're harmonizing our commercial code. So I'm really excited to see there finally be some accomplishment with this. There's little things that I think are edge case issues that you know, maybe that's not the time for it right now. What I think would be like what would serve this district the best would be there be some commitment to like increasing pedestrian interaction and participation with this district so that we can and then encourage businesses to redevelop in a way that starts. It's not like we would be designing things to specifically incentivize sales tax income, but it sure would be nice if we had restaurants and bars and things like that where we'd be, you know, getting a revenue stream off of this, and it would also be more usable for our residents.
Mm-hmm.
So the parts where I'm kind of like curious are, I think, is you raised issues that might make it a non-starter for a developer. Then there's other things where like some of the incentive provisions, I was curious, like this dedicating 10% to a bike path in exchange for reducing parking spots, but we may not even require parking spots. It just doesn't really seem that there's a lot of carrot to that carrot. It sounds pretty ineffective. And so there were things like that where I'm like, it sure would be nice to have something to, because there's, in my mind, a vision of this involves something that's somewhat like more walkable and approachable from a pedestrian standpoint, and it encourages that foot traffic and then businesses that cater to that. And then we end up with an Apple store, which is like the highest per square foot retail in the country, and then we make tons of money, just tons.
Not anymore, not with sales tax sourcing.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. Brooke always has a really good zinger. She's like, wait till you learn about this area of law. I always learn something from you, Brooke. Appreciate it.
So I will say it is good to have this conversation now for a couple reasons. At the next meeting, the one thing that we don't want to end up with is, hey, here's this laundry list of changes that I can't put in a motion that I want to see in the code, and we need to have another meeting to see it. That's going to throw our schedule off, and so it's good to go ahead and have these. To some of your points, let me see if I can start kind of addressing them a little bit. Great points about the pedestrian orientation. That is a big piece of the comprehensive plan objectives. One of the really hard things that we have in development is what our codes actually are and what they aren't, right? What they aren't is suggestions. What they are is minimum rules. So the best that we can ever do is say, if I got a developer who doesn't want to play ball with the city, just wants to do their own thing, this is the minimum they can do, and we're okay with that? Now, we always hope that that's not what we have, but we got to be prepared for it. Normally what we really want is like, hey, that person who has the same vision that we do for Rollingwood, and we're just simpatico, and it's wonderful and great. So a couple of things that we did to try to keep in mind existing businesses, existing development, but also lean towards creating that pedestrian orientation. The first piece is that option to bring buildings out to the road. Serves two purposes, helps reduce some of the nuisance and buffering needs between the residential in the back and the business itself. The other thing it does is it starts to frame that corridor. So I encourage pedestrian traffic, right? Think about when you walk, especially, and we know Bee Cave Road is high speed. It's going to be a while before we can get TxDOT to come around and understand that's maybe 40 and 45 is not appropriate.
Yeah.
It's a whole different conversation. It's going to take a lot of work. But one of the things that we do is we start looking at sidewalks and we look at pulling buildings out towards the street. So think about the areas that you're most comfortable walking. Most of the time, that's not where it's street, sidewalk that's a foot or two off the street, parking lot, and then building. Because what I'm really doing is I'm putting a with no trees, maybe some shrub screening at best. Because what I'm really doing is I'm putting a pedestrian in the vehicle path. Because everything on both sides of you is vehicle and auto oriented. As soon as I start pulling buildings up, yes, it will push some parking to the sides, even if we don't have parking requirements, or to the rear. That does come with some complications or some
below.
other pieces, or
Could go up.
potentially below. It's very expensive. You have some interesting geography and geology here to be able to do that. And then I'm really starting to create that pedestrian space and that feel-good piece where it's like, yeah, we'll walk. Because there's stuff to look at. There's just that feeling that we get on those roadways versus that very sterile environment. In planning, it's a term that we call a strode. Streets are a specific thing, and roads are another. Roads get you to and from locations. Streets provide commerce and other items. And when I combine those things, I get a strode. It's not good at either moving people or really helping with commerce because it's completely auto-oriented. So that's the first piece of this. Along with that comes the landscaping piece. To your point about the parking, the code currently is proposed to maintain parking. It's just a recommendation out of the committee for both Planning and Zoning Commission as well as City Council to consider eliminating parking. Yes, that will kind of eliminate that extra incentive, but if it stays, that extra incentive to the point of impervious cover helps. Because any extra parking spaces that I can reduce further, that means I can have more building or more of something else that's not parking, right? That's good for the community for the most part. That's good for the developer for the most part. It's a win-win. If that goes away, there is still the incentive for additional impervious cover that we've got in there that involves, the trail dedication as well as the extra retention requirements and low-impact design or development requirements, which is a much more creative, pretty way to typically do stormwater. And so, you do have a lot of different pieces kind of working together to help frame that area. Part of it also with the trail is this kind of longer term vision of, hey, it'd be nice if we have a pedestrian trail along Ings Creek that maybe goes from Edge Grove, around the creek bend, both directions all the way out to the loop, and then kind of back around to Touching Bee Cave as the creek crosses. Not every property is eligible for that, right? Just is what it is. But that gives me another way that I can have residents coming out of the neighborhoods, maybe walking. We've even talked about there's been contemplation of golf cart paths or maybe some of that, local electric vehicle kind of pieces to just help alternative modes of transportation because we want the sales tax base and all of the great things that come with that, but we also want business and commercial enterprise that benefits the community as a whole. Bars, restaurants, those things that you need to function that we're like, I got to drive out of the city to go do these things. I want to keep my dollars here best that I can. And so there are a lot of those pieces where we really struggle with zoning codes is I can't be prescriptive insofar as saying, hey, here's a great way to do this in a suggestive piece. That's where your awesome staff comes into play as they get approached by developers who say, hey, we're looking at this and let's have a pre-development meeting and start talking through this project that we want to do. Maybe it's an expansion, maybe it's a facelift of an existing building, or maybe it's even fully redevelopment. And they say, oh, well, here's creative ways to help you get more of what you want and also more of what we want because they're going to guide the developer through kind of what the community wants, if you will, which is, again, that comprehensive plan document in coordination with the zoning requirements.
Agree 100% on the amazing staff comment. We do have the best city staff in the world. So on the Eanes trail thing, it's called Eanes Creek, is that right?
Yes.
And it kind of backs this commercial zone. Is that part of the commercial property, or is that city, or is that's part of the commercial property?
All of the above. So it just depends on which section.
Okay.
For example, where
it's
we've got
kind of it's not really shown here, but I've seen it in satellite images, and you can kind of, to me, there's potential there. Again, I'm not a developer. I'm just
so a lot of it is on
Unbelievable.
commercial lots. There is a city lot, for example, as you go down Edge Grove, where all the newer landscaping's coming in right there. That's actually a city lot. But most of it is commercial lots. The other complication with that is it's regulatory floodplain and floodway. And so those come with a whole bunch of restrictions that more or less says you're not going to be able to build in that area, especially the regulatory floodway, without expending a ton of dollars to prove things like compensatory storage and no rise certificates, it can be very, very challenging. On top of that, we also have that 75-foot buffer because all of the properties on the other side of the creek, for the most part, with the exception I think one spot, are residentially zoned. So I have that buffer, and to the point of impervious cover, a lot of the properties that we have on that side of the road are wider than they are deep. And that's kind of a unique piece that we have just because of the geography of where the road is, where the creek is. I have these physical boundaries. And so even if you said, hey, we want to see 100% impervious cover, you'll never be able to get there.
Yeah,
In
I
part
would-
because of the floodplain, but in the other pieces, the buffering and that setback requirement for that piece.
Okay. That's really helpful. I do think that's like an area where even if that might be on commercial property, it's kind of not useful for the commercial developer in any other form than if it were to be maybe made into some type of access.
Yep.
Um,
Trail and buffer works great for it.
So that does bring up a question I had though about the vegetation sort of restrictions I saw, and I think it's really just to understand what that means, because it's like we want to maintain the native vegetation, which I understand. Like we like the character and nature of Rollingwood having the trees and things like that in these like floodplains, but do we create like some kind of problem where like they're not maintaining this area as well, and you end up with like, I remember learning just enough to be dangerous about like fire prevention and stuff like that, and it has to do with like accumulation of vegetation that really should kind of get cleared out. And so I'm not talking about trees obviously, but more like just some of the stuff that these fields of native vegetation.
I think actually they say within this document that, that the native vegetation will be saved, but that there's still going to be cleanup that goes on. That doesn't include, the saving doesn't include routine maintenance of the green space, so that you might be able to use it for fire prevention or just aesthetic value or whatever.
Yeah, I guess I was
it's-
curious,
it's
like,
kind of in there.
I don't own any of these properties, nor will I probably ever,
Yeah.
but I'm
Yeah.
curious, like, does that, it just seemed vague to me, like what that meant. Like,
Ah.
can I plant things out there, and then I was thinking if I was a commercial, like, obviously my frame of reference is a residential owner.
Right.
And if I saw something like that, I would be like, I don't even know what that means I can do there, or should do, what I'm required to do, or not do. And so I don't know did we get feedback from developers on that type of restriction, and is that common?
So I will let Councilmember Brown address what commentary was given by developers whenever they were going through the comprehensive plan. However, I will say it is very common.
Oh, okay.
So it is very common to see buffering against floodplains. It is incredibly common to see buffering between residential and non-residential uses. And that buffering generally consists of things like distance, solid walls or screening, and then landscaping, because it all works in conjunction for different things, right? So walls really help with noise. The landscaping is almost always with a combination of small and large trees and shrubs, is going to help with visual screening over time as new growth comes in, because the walls and fences can only be so high before it gets weird, right?
Yeah.
And I get engineering requirements or stuff like that. We don't want to see 12-foot walls. Like, that's great for a retaining piece if we need it, but it's not great for a separation wall. It starts to look like a crazy junkyard or a prison or something. And so a lot of what was designed into some of the buffering requirements was thinking about, I've got existing areas that don't have any vegetation, or maybe it was clear cut out at the time, and we want to avoid that. The native vegetation is always going to be some of your best. Beautifully landscaped areas, that's also great, but there's a kind of a time and place for that, and that's a lot more of that public-facing kind of pretty side, because to plant at the level that I need that native vegetation typically comes in to create good solid screening, it's very high, right? That's a lot of planting. That's a lot of extra new maintenance. What this provision doesn't do is it doesn't prevent you, as Dave mentioned, it doesn't prevent you from cleaning up, right? We want you to clean the underbrush. We want you to clean some of that scrub. What we don't want you to do is come in and say, I don't care about the natural topography or the existing trees or the existing vegetation. I'm going to make this site work for me, and we're going to bring in some of the world's biggest earth moving equipment, and I'm going to make this thing work. Good news is, won't happen anyways. You've got pretty good drainage and lane clearing requirements to begin with. This is just that extra strength to say, these are our areas that we're really concerned with from a kind of natural perspective. So those of you who have it and it's already dense and nice, great. You don't have to do a bunch of extra. You can, absolutely, because again, these are minimums. You can always plant more. Especially if you really want to use that trail to incentivize folks to come in. It makes it really nice. But for those people who don't have anything or maybe have some interesting other spots, we want to make sure that we're adding that back in as those properties expand or redevelop in those areas. And I forgot to mention earlier, because there's a question about, hey, what if we have people who are already existing over the impervious cover limits? The city's code already has a whole section on nonconformities, where we acknowledge how we handle those properties. Generally speaking, they're not required to come into compliance until they start touching certain areas or do full redevelopment. And it really just depends on what they're doing and when they're doing it. And so different requirements may be triggered at different times.
Very helpful. Thank you. I think where I was going on this, Brooke, was I was honestly thinking more like, because I remember that the parkland with the WAC went through this process where they had to get a landscape plan approved, and so then I was like, oh, should we instead require there to be like a landscape plan? But it sounds like your response is that that could be pretty expensive if you made like the type of vegetation you'd need to keep the screening would be expensive to do, and if there's already native trees that are accomplishing that, that's preferred.
So they'll already have to do the plan. All commercial development has to go through a site planning process.
Yeah.
So they've got to show compliance, and we'll go through all of that. Again, a lot of it is, if I've already got this dense vegetative screen, if I cut it all down because I've got to do all new plantings, it's gone until it grows back over time. Shrubs grow relatively quick within a couple years. Trees take a while, right? And so a lot of this, again, is we like kind of what we have. We like that you can't, in certain areas at least, kind of see some of the houses back up onto the hill till we get further up from Bee Cave. And so we want to preserve that to the greatest extent possible. But also, again, say, hey, if you don't have anything, you're in this unique spot, we've got alternatives for you. There's, landscaping, and in fact, there's even a special exception that's written in there that helps with some of the distance requirements and some of that for those very, very unique properties. And just so that y'all know, because I know that we've always had some interesting conversation about special exception versus variance, a special exception does go to the Board of Adjustment, but it is not conditioned on that same hardship, very difficult criteria that zoning variances are. So it's actually proposed as having its own criteria and findings. So it's a lesser standard than a hardship, but still, pretty onerous. So you've got to kind of have the right conditions and the right aspect to do it. It's not going to be granted to everybody, but it gives a little bit more allowance for us to kind of work with folks, and the city to work with folks to say, yeah, what you're proposing meets the spirit and intent and our criteria. We can approve this without you having that hardship level of finding, which for something like this is going to be very difficult to prove.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
More?
Brooke Brown, just briefly, if you think about the where the FEMA floodplain is along between the residential and commercial area, I was holding up the zoning map, and you can see the FEMA Eanes Creek starts on the north side of Bee Caves Road. It starts just east of the Palisades property, between the Palisades property and the car wash. Runs behind the car wash, runs across Edge Grove, runs between all of these houses that are along Timberline that back up to commercial property.
Yeah.
And so when the big office building was built on the corner of Loop 1 and Bee Caves Road, part of the approval process for that large office building was to implement the 100-foot green belt that runs along the backside of that between that property and Timberline, and is the FEMA floodplain, basically.
Mhm.
The green belt follows the FEMA floodplain. And so when we began to think about changes to the commercial corridor, the people along Timberline were most anxious about maintaining that screening between their properties and the properties on the north side of Bee Caves Road. And so the compromise was to keep the screening but reduce it from 100 feet to 75 feet. So that was, we didn't get a lot of pushback that it needed to be more or that was too much. And so that's where the 75-foot greenbelt comes from, and it is that area of what is also the FEMA floodplain, which can't be built under TCEQ requirements except for extensive conditioning, I would say. You might think about, there's one property where the eye clinic is, over in this same PUD, that is built across the creek bed, and that creek bed actually runs through the PUD and then runs along, turns almost due north and runs along Delana Lane under Rollingwood Drive, where the bridge is right next to Zilker Park, and into that gully that that's on the Austin Natural Science Center. So all of that, when we were trying to think of what we could do for these commercial properties while maintaining the privacy and the expectations of homeowners all along Timberline, that's the compromise that was come up with.
Yep.
I was recently in Wimberley for an afternoon with girlfriends, and I took some pictures to show what they've done along the creek bed in downtown Wimberley, just to see the kind of, you might look at our green belt and say, that's just a bunch of weeds and trees. But if I would...
That is what I would say, yes.
Yes, let me show you some thoughts about that.
That'd be great. To me, this is a potential area for noticeable improvement with our pedestrians and having an access to this commercial zone. And so that's the part I'm just trying to think through. But I'd love to see whatever you found.
And actually, think about that. If that access can happen from Edge Grove,
yeah.
then it'll be all on Rollingwood property, and you can drive your golf cart over there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not
I know.
I'm not a golf cart guy, but sure. Or your bike. There's old-fashioned ways to get there too.
I'll try and be loud enough to hear without a mic and over the rain. This is a heritage tree that's in a fairly small retail property in downtown Wimberley. So I wanted you to see how it can be incorporated while there's still opportunity to develop the property. Sorry, it's not Cassie, what do you do? These next slides are properties along the creek bed. This is the main street is behind this building. This is a cafe, bar, outdoor area. This is creek over here, and so you can see they've got basically a mulched backyard with picnic tables and other kinds of places to hang out and have a beer or a meal or have kids play. This next one how do we get it full screen? This property also is located along that creek. This is a really fun kids bridge over a kids play area. Here's an area where adults and everybody can hang out and have a meal, and it all faces, it faces
Back towards the creek.
back towards the creek.
Mhm.
It's not a huge structural investment,
Yeah.
but it is something I backing up to what is a completely natural area.
It's good.
It's very helpful. Thank you, Brooke.
We could have that
So
here.
those are, that was kind of, you know, as Bryce has said, you gotta take the whole thing in balance. There were not just how can we get the most retail sales, but how can we make this appealing to our community, protect our neighbors along Timberline, and also do as much as we can to encourage development.
Yeah, that's great.
And
Very good.
the zoning map is in your packet.
Oh yeah, I've got
Yeah.
a
Yep, we have-
smaller version of your picture in front of you. It's very helpful. Yeah, I think like to me that's the two there's two things that I'm still like noodling over,
Uh-huh.
and one is just to try and get a vision like that. Like, is there anything else we could do? And so I'm just, and I think the Open Meetings Act, like our only chance to talk about these things are now, right? And so I was just going to get out there. Here's some things that I think are priorities. Let it sort of simmer, and we can talk about it now. And then I'd say let's come back next week. Would be my preference, just so we have that chance to dialogue about it and think. And the only other thing I was thinking is just that if there's some additional, like, something more than just you have to leave the FEMA floodplain native, is there something else? Like, because they can't build in it because of the footprint or the 75 setback. They can't build in it because of the floodplain. So that's great. I was just thinking, like, do we want to put something in there where, like, we have to approve it as a city, and that's where we start building up some kind of landscaped path through there that, like, connects all these different pieces of it. So that's just one thing I was thinking about. The only other thing, and I think I'm probably, like, in a minority here on this, I constantly wonder how much value there is in dark sky provisions, because we live in a small city that happens to be engulfed by a much larger metropolitan area, and I don't think our little blip on the map is going to have any impact at all on dark skies. That said, I'm super sensitive to the fact that we've got a commercial zone backing up to a residential zone, and I want to make sure there's no lights going into homes or affecting their enjoyment of their residential properties. So I hadn't fully digested the lighting part of it yet. I think it's probably, if people have thought about this and digested it and they think it's fine, I'm going to trust that better judgment. But I'm not really nothing that we do here is going to make the sky any darker until, like, we get, like, the city of Austin to do something instead. So those are the things. I'm only throwing it out there because we don't get a chance to talk as a group, and so those are the things I've been thinking about. I'll be quiet now, Dave. I promise.
good. Thanks, Brian. All right. Well,
Let me just add a quick comment on the lighting on dark sky. The commercial code is restricting the foot candles at the property line to .25. City of Austin requirements is .4. So we're less than the City of Austin. Okay.
I don't know what a foot candle is. That's like how much light goes out of the light or something?
Think of it as like the moon, a full moon.
Okay.
It's close to that,
Yeah.
more or less. So and dark sky is everything's requiring it now. International conservation codes. It's pretty well universal requirements, and that simply means that everything's going to be completely cut off, fully shielded. You shouldn't be able to see light sources unless you're down the hill and you can look up. But we have complaint variations or possibilities where if a person complains, you could probably get extra shields put on the light fixture to eliminate the glare. So this code, proposed lighting ordinances, exceeds City of Austin and is pretty well comparable to most any other lighting ordinance around.
So when we say exceeds, it means it's more restrictive than City of Austin?
Yes, less light, almost half as much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that moves the needle for me. My point is more that the City of Austin is a bigger problem than we are on dark skies.
Well, I'm just saying that not what goes up, but what's down and is what they're requiring at the property line on commercial properties.
I see. Okay,
Okay.
so yeah, you're
Yeah.
talking about the property line. So,
So it
this
would
goes to
affect
the neighbors issue that I brought up. Yeah,
Right.
and I definitely am supportive of things that keep light infiltration from affecting our residential properties. So
Oh,
that's
we're not-
I get what you're saying.
I
now.
don't think we're in the bird migration business.
And-
We're in the keeping your neighbors happy business.
Yeah. Okay. That.
Yeah.
And
that all for all of those. I
Yeah.
fully think that's a great idea.
now that you got
I just
me-
noticed it was the most read on here was like that added section is it's pretty extensive, and I was like, oh, maybe I should read that more carefully. There's a lot there.
Well, the energy codes are coming in more restrictive. The 2021 is requiring parking lot pole lights to have 2 sensors. We always had the photo cell sensor to bring it on only at night,
Mm-hmm.
but now they're requiring motion detectors that will only keep the light on for 15 minutes if there's no motion detected.
Mm.
And then it goes down 50%.
So I have a question. These recommendations for the commercial, this has nothing to do with PUD right now, right? So like the approved buildings like at MOPAC and
Like that one right there.
right, that will not be affected by this. The lighting, anything else. Okay, just want to clarify that.
That's my understanding, yeah.
I'm not familiar with the rules of PUD.
Yeah, so certain pieces will, and certain won't. Anything that is specific to the new commercial zoning district, which is our combination of C1 and C2, would not. But there's also some general requirements that are applicable broadly, such as the lighting, that would.
Okay.
But again, it's not a function of, hey, if this is approved and you recommend approval to council, that the next day the city goes out there and says, hey, everyone in a PUD, go fix your stuff. No, it gets fixed as that fixture is ready for replacement.
Mm-hmm.
So if they're like, hey, we've got this, we got a wall pack light on the back, right, which is typically an exposed bulb pack. Can't replace it with that. You're going to have a hooded and shielded piece to help with that cutoff. And I will say, I work in quite a few cities. This is a very good approach, and it's a great start. You don't go nearly as far as like full dark skies, because they're like, if you ever read the model ordinance, it's like 20 pages long on just lighting. It is huge. I would say the most important and most critical elements have been included in here, and as Jerry pointed out, it's hooded and shielded, full cutoff pieces, really helping minimize that light trespass, so I don't have just over excessive luminescence. And while the city of Austin hasn't done that, and you're very correct, we're still going to have glare on the horizon for probably all of our lifetimes. It's a start. And it's a start that will make it distinguish and help you distinguish as a community. This is Rollingwood. You can tell because the lighting fixtures look much more pleasant to everyone. It's more pleasant to drivers. It's more pleasant to pedestrians. It's just kind of better overall. Again, because you do have those bulbs that are not exposed. And there are certain exceptions, so like seasonal lighting doesn't mean I can't wrap my trees in Christmas lights. You know, there are pieces that are allowed outside of that. It's just permanent lighting fixtures that go in going forward.
Yeah.
We did not cancel Christmas. Is that what
Did
you
not
said?
cancel
Okay.
Christmas.
No, but that's residential and it's coming up, so this is just sort of a forerunner for, now we can't require all the requirements in commercial in residential, but CRCRC is working on it to come up with something equitable.
And we're going to model what we're doing in CRCRC after what is approved here in the commercial piece.
Yeah.
Yeah,
we're-
it's gonna be, they're gonna look very much the same. So, okay, do we have any other discussion around what's being presented here in this package? There's a lot here.
Oh, I'm pretty sure no one wants to hear more from me.
Well, you know,
I'll
it
pass the
actually,
baton.
it actually goes back to my question to Brooke about, you know, how this could have been handled. Where we've got the big gulp here, you know, and if it were taken in individual pieces, you know, we would be talking about lighting as a separate issue, and we'd be talking about impervious cover as a separate issue, we'd be talking about all these things. probably devoting an entire meeting to each of those things individually.
I think doing the big gulp approach is actually, I like this. I like being able to see all the things we're trying to do at once, because I think that what I felt like created some flaws in our prior code was that there was piecemeal additions that would happen, and then it was only until we were having to sort it out here at P&Z we'd discover a conflict, or that there'd be multiple interpretations based on which provision you're looking at. So to me, I think this was the right way to do it. I think, I know it took a longer amount of time, but I think, you guys put in so much hard work on it. And this way you can kind of understand all the different elements. But, I was just still digesting. Those are the big questions I had. And then, we don't really get a chance to talk unless we meet
You're right.
in a non-quorum basis.
You're right.
But we don't get a chance to talk it out. And I'm a talker, so I'll stop now. But those are the things that I would kind of seen on.
Come on
the
down to
list.
the house, we'll talk.
Just remember, right? We don't know that everything in here will work perfectly for every spot.
Yeah.
We will never know that.
Yep.
That is, I've been doing this a long time. That is something that you can't guarantee. We do the best that we can, and then we watch it, right? And your staff's gonna say, hey, we've had multiple people like, this is a problematic piece. And to your point about, hey, there's certain areas that we want to kind of take a more bite-sized approach to. Those are those areas where you then say, well, this little part's not working quite the way we want it to. Let's tweak it. This is never set in stone forever. We should absolutely be looking at it as things are or aren't working. Are we getting the results we anticipate and expect? If we're not getting them, is it because of the code? Is it because of something else? And we just do that evaluation and kind of run through that so that you can do updates periodically and kind of do those minor tweaks. Because this is a very big change, right? It's probably the biggest change that I think we probably made in decades.
1987 was the last major.
36, almost 37 years ago, right?
Yep.
So, I mean, this is huge. Our world has changed dramatically since then. I mean, we've all seen it on the residential side. The houses that are being built today are very different than the other ones. I was going to say that was actually the year I was born in. So, it's great that we're getting that updated. But again, we don't need to wait that long to make minor tweaks. I don't know that you're going to need to start it over again. I don't know. Maybe you do. Maybe we have some really crazy stuff whenever like quadcopters and all that fun technology hits us like a crazy bomb. But we'll see when we get there, right? For now, we say, hey, does this start to get us there? Can we, are there tweaks that need to be made that don't quite get there, or things that don't make sense where we've coded it and we start having this conversation and different people are reading it different ways? That's always one of my trigger points is I sit down with my team and say, hey, everybody read this. What does it mean to you? And if we have 3 different answers, we got to start over because we didn't get it right. So
Okay.
just
Thanks,
for what it's
Bryce.
worth.
Okay, so we either move forward with this or we table it until next week. What's the group's preference here?
Well, I've already stated mine.
Yeah, well,
I'm
And I've already stated mine.
Wait,
so-
wait. I'm doing too much talking. Michael, what do
Okay.
you think? How do you feel about it?
I
What do you wanna do?
Maybe I wanted to. One more question. I'm curious. How many property owners did we talk to, and what was the response that they gave us about this plan in terms of like their excitement level about it?
Commercial or residential?
Commercial.
Wally, that owns I'm going blank. Wally Grainer was a member of the Comprehensive Plan Task Force. He's a commercial property owner on Bee Caves Road. He attended every meeting. He was there for all the discussions. We also had,
Which properties does he own?
I don't,
He owns the Palisades.
he owns the Palisades. We also had, Meredith, who was the director of the Westlake Chamber of Commerce. As a member of the task force, she attended regularly. She attended all the meetings. So she was also representing not just people who are current property owners, but the larger Westlake commercial group.
She was a member of Westlake Chamber of Commerce.
She was the
That sounds like a
director.
spy.
She was the director
Sorry,
of
just-
Westlake Chamber of Commerce. a number of our commercial property owners are members of Westlake Chamber of Commerce, because there's not a Rollingwood Chamber of Commerce. And so that was our day-to-day input, and then we had various commercial property owners that would come and talk to us. We also had David Smith, who talked to his client base that are property owners, commercial property owners and developers within Rollingwood. He was a member of the task force, was there for every meeting, was part of the committee that worked on setbacks and requirements for development along both sides of Big Caves Road, the height issues and that part of it. And so those were the resources that came together to come up with the comprehensive plan.
That was a good question.
So Wally, so like for example, Wally on the Palisades, he
Wasn't
support-
there representing just himself, but his position was to represent commercial property owners along Big Caves Road. So like y'all represent not just your own point of view, but the community. The same thing happened with the members of the task force. It was not, and we had one night that was just where Tom invited I think the committee sent written invitations to all the commercial property owners along Big Caves Road and had a night devoted just to hearing their concerns. I don't remember exactly that night and exactly who all was there, because that was about 3 years ago. But I think we did our job in inviting that input.
And do you know? I mean, because I thought it was interesting that like you brought up Wally, because the Palisades has 3-story portion of their property, and now they're limited to 2 stories. So he's in spite of that, he supports this.
Exactly. What he supports is that he can, if his property, he will not redevelop his property, but if another property owner decides to redevelop it, we've made provision for commercial properties that can't meet the 75-foot green belt. His building today, from the very beginning, was non-conforming. He bought it from the previous developer who had developed it in a non-conforming way. And so he wants that property owner, if someone buys from him, he wants to be able for them to maintain that property and not be subject to the 75-foot setback, because he doesn't have one there now. And if you look at what the special exception provision in the summary, if you look at the discussion on the last page, nope, that's not it. It's on the last page of the index. The 107491, that is a special exception for properties that can't meet the 75-foot setback, and what kind of requirement they would have to show to get a special exception for development.
Actually, the
Frankly-
detail is on 55 and 56 of the larger package. It's the last page.
Okay.
Special
Well, the
exception.
last page of the index will reference the line numbers in Exhibit A that are attached to that policy. And so we address those directly, frankly, openly, transparently with Wally, and that's what we came up with. Is an exception that would allow that property to be redeveloped with conditions. And
But he goes to the BOA for a special exception for that, or whoever would.
Yep. BOA.
What
You
it-
get-
I
you
didn't-
get the approval for a special exception, yeah,
Yeah,
it goes to the
right.
BOA.
And that is because the special exception is basically to develop what is the appropriate, for any new development, what's the appropriate screening between it and those cul-de-sacs on the east end of Timberline that abut that property. We have that same special exception would apply to the 4 commercial properties that are at the very west end of Rollingwood Drive. There's a little triangle there across from the McDonald's of commercial properties. Some of those back up to South Peak. There's not a 75-foot green belt there now, but there is some landscape screening, and so that special exception provision would also apply to those properties for landscaping that would go up between those and at redevelopment between those properties and anything along South Peak.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
I'm around. You're not. You can talk to me if you want to call me about any questions, because I'm not on your. Yeah, I'm not on your commission, so
Very nice.
happy to answer any questions. And I'm not on your quorum restriction either. So, thank you. I know this is a lot of material. We've tried to present it in a way that's you can look at it either page by page or policy by policy, and hope you'll do that, and see you next week.
Okay,
Thank you, Brooke.
It sounds to me like the consensus, or generally, is that we need to hold off until next week on this. Give you all another chance to look at it. Correct me if I'm wrong?
Well, I'm comfortable moving ahead, but if it makes the other members feel comfortable waiting a week, I can do that too.
I'm comfortable moving ahead. I'm not sure I'll be here next week, but that's okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've stated my preference would
Yeah, I
be
think so.
to percolate
Okay.
a week more, but this has been really helpful.
Okay, Michael?
I could use more time to review. I haven't honestly
Okay,
spent as much time with this as I'd like to.
okay, all right. And Mike, I think you would like to have some more time with it?
Sure.
All right. Well then, I don't think we need to take a motion on that. We'll just table this and move on to the next agenda item, okay? Now, agenda item number 6, I heard the mayor recite this last week. Ken, I don't know if there needs to be any real discussion around this, but do I need to read this?
No, not necessarily if we're not going to discuss it. Because we're not taking action on the first item, we don't need a recommendation from this either,
Okay.
so you do not need to read all of
Okay.
that. But just for what that item is, it's just the associated rezoning
Yeah.
of those properties that are currently C1 and 2 to become just C.
So we just,
So-
We're talking about item 5, right?
yeah, we're
Item
talking
five.
about,
I
we're
think
in the
5's
regular
tied to
agenda item
4.
number 5.
Right.
And what we're talking about is essentially a consolidation of all the various kinds of commercial properties into a single, so that they can be interchangeably used.
Let's table item 5 until we address item 4.
Okay,
Perfect.
there's not a whole lot to it. It's kind of a up or down, yes or no.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
I'm ready to move that one forward. I mean,
Well,
I don't think I think we
we're-
need item 4 to happen first. We can't do item 5.
I mean, you could, but it's kind of putting the cart before the horse,
okay.
because you can't rezone it unless you change the regulations.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. Okay. So we'll skip, you understand what this is about, what item 5 is, and we can just move on to item number 6, which we happen to have a member of the CRCRC with us today to talk to us about the tree ordinance recommendations from CRCRC.
Good evening. My name is Jay Van Bavel. I'm at 5012 Timberline. I'm coming to you as one of the members of the CRCRC CRCRC committee or commission, and I was asked to be on a subcommittee dealing with the tree ordinance, which I've been doing with two other members. We've been well, let me just tell you a little bit about myself because I don't know most of you. I have lived in Rollingwood for a little over a year now, but my wife and I have lived just off Stratford Drive in Austin for about 27 years, and we have walked this neighborhood for 27 years. And so when it was time for us to downsize, we said, you know, we want to move to Rollingwood. And what were the things that really appealed to us? Well, the rolling part we weren't real wild about because we were downsizing and wanted an age-in-place house. And so the rolling part sometimes was problematic, but we walked the neighborhoods, and we finally found the lot that we liked. And but we were particularly enamored of the urban forest that we live in. And over those years of walking the neighborhood, you know, we have noticed what we think is just a steady, gradual diminution of the urban forest in Rollingwood. And so I'm interested in participating in any process that maintains and preserves the wood in Rollingwood. So as you know, there was a survey done. The CRCRC did a survey dealing with the entire building code, possible revisions, and it was like 36 questions on it, and I think this was completed in early last fall. And there were only 3 questions on there dealing with trees. You know, there were a lot of different issues to address. One of the documents in the packet is just really a summary of those 3 questions, the results of those. And question 15 was, how much of a priority to you are the trees in Rollingwood on a scale of 1 to 5? And very high response to either highest priority or high priority. So, and you read through the comments to really get the true sense of what they mean by that. And by far, a majority of Rollingwood residents are very interested in maintaining our current tree canopy. The other question was, is our current tree ordinance doing enough to save protected and heritage trees? That was a little bit misleading because we don't even have a heritage tree designation in the current ordinance. So, but many people said that about half people thought that the ordinance was doing enough to maintain the tree canopy, but when you read through their comments, a lot of them, well, they thought it was, but they don't really know what's in the ordinance, and they hadn't had any need to apply the ordinance to their particular property. So they were just sort of generally, well, I think it's okay, but not sure. Then 40% said that they definitely thought it was not doing enough. And then I think 9% said that they just left it blank. But they left it blank, but they put comments in there. So if you read through their comments of the people that left it blank, yes, they didn't say yes or no, they just made comments. There were a lot of comments saying that we're not doing enough to protect our trees. The other thing is this ChatGPT. It's really just ChatGPT is just analyzing the comments and trying to put them in similar languages. So you can read all the individual comments. They're all available, or you can maybe just look at the summary of what ChatGPT thought the comments were saying. So we thought that we had a charge to try to build on the current ordinance. We're not trying to discard everything that's been done before because it has served the community reasonably well. So we have a list that we posted of the recommended changes to the Rollingwood Tree Maintenance Ordinance from the CRCRC. So the tree committee, subcommittee, presented these items to the whole committee, and we took each one individually and, either said yes or no to each individual item. And so I thought I would just go through these and then see if we get comments on them. I'll just read this statement. It's based on the strong support in the survey for maintaining the tree canopy in rolling wood. When asked whether they thought the tree ordinance was adequate, this task, 51% said yes. However, in the comments from those yes votes, many were either uncertain what the current tree ordinance stated or had not any occasion to refer to the ordinance for recent tree work on their property. Based on these survey results, the CRCRC had made the following recommendations to strengthen the current tree ordinance to make it more effective in maintaining the current tree canopy and to try and keep the wood in rolling wood of our beautiful city. The wording, exact proposed wording, or the specific change was put in green. And then there were some additional little changes were put in red at our last meeting. The first one was, and I might just address, I know that there have been some comments made that why present the tree ordinance by itself and not including it in all the building code ordinances, changes that we're gonna recommend. For example, height has come up already. And I think it's because I can see by the process that you've gone through that it's taken 2-3 years to come to this stage, and things are happening with the trees. Every week I see, almost every week, a new build going up where they're clearing the lots, and removing trees, some heritage trees, which are irreplaceable. And so things are happening, to our tree canopy on an ongoing basis. And that's why I think carving this out as a separate piece, maybe we can, come up with something a little bit sooner than 2 or 3 years to try to save our trees. Item number 1 is to change the name of the Article 2, Division 10, which is currently listed as landscape, Subdivision 2, which is currently listed as tree canopy management ordinance, to change it to residential landscape and tree canopy management. And there's nothing in the ordinance right now that deals with landscaping, 0. It's all just about trees. And we thought it would be important to introduce the concept of xeriscape landscaping into the ordinance with some suggestions to use native and adapted low water use plants and drought tolerant turf grasses for lawns. And again, we're not recommending any regulations, but just education, a statement of purpose. And the exact language is landscape, because the city experiences frequent drought conditions, low water demanding landscapes, xeriscapes are encouraged by using native and adapted low water use plants, possibly from the Austin Grow Green Guide. And there's a link there. The consideration should also be given to planting turf grass on less than 50% of the total landscaped areas, with that turf grass preferably having summer dormancy capabilities such as buffalo grass, zoysia grass, or non-seeding varieties of Bermuda grass. So very specific suggestions that people might think about when they're doing their landscaping. Item 3 was to insert a definition for heritage tree category into the ordinance. And this is the same definition that is in your the business corridor proposal, which we just really saw 2 days ago. So there may be some area there where we can compare the two proposals and maybe have some more agreement in terms of terms, et cetera. But we're suggesting that a heritage tree means a tree that has a diameter of 24 inches or more, measured 4 1/2 feet above natural grade, and is one of the protected species. And that was one of the other addendums in your agenda packet. Addendum A is the list of protected species. Ash, cypress, elm, oaks, pecan, etc. So we're suggesting for the first time to put a definition for heritage trees in the tree ordinance. Then we're suggesting to change the criteria for planting alternatives to protective species. That is, trees that are removed from the utility setback. Trees from addendum B, which is the so-called replacement species. And that's for trees planted within 20 feet of an above-ground power cable or telephone line. You can plant these species that only get to a total height, usually of about 20 feet or so. But there's a real loophole in the current ordinance, and we want to try to remove that loophole. And what that loophole is if you remove a 12-inch oak tree from your front setback area, you can replace it from 3 trees from this alternative list, and as long as that's done underneath your power line. If you have power lines on your property, you have a 20-foot setback from those power lines. You can plant the replacement trees, like you can put 3 crepe myrtles. So you can take out, right now, you can take out a 12-inch live oak tree, that big, and replace it with 3 crepe myrtles in your backyard under the utilities line or your side yard, wherever your utility lines are. And
it's happening.
Huh?
And it's happening.
It is happening, yes.
Yes.
And in fact, you could take out a 30-inch tree, heritage oak, and do the same thing. Replace it with 3 trees from this alternate list with the current ordinance the way it is now. So we want to try to remove that loophole, which we think is very destructive to the protected trees. So we're saying change the criteria for planting alternatives to protected species from the utility setback tree list to limit it only to protected trees removed from those areas. So if you remove a oak tree from the 20-foot setback from utility line, then you can replace it with the alternate. You have to replace it with the alternate species list because they're not going to get 30 feet tall. But if you remove a protected tree from a side yard setback or front yard setback, and it's not within the utility line, you need to replace it with a protected tree in that area. Okay. So the exact language is for protected trees removed from within 20 feet of the above ground cable, power cable, or telephone line, the following species can be used for replacement. These species cannot be used to replace a protected tree removed from areas that are not 20 feet from an above ground power cable or telephone line. And so that would eliminate that loophole. Number 5, we wanted to add a definition for critical root zone, which is not in the current ordinance, but I do see it is in the business corridor part dealing with trees. And I think the definition we're coming up with is the same. The business one may be a little bit more extensive, but the definition would be a critical root zone means an area around the trunk with a radius of 1 foot for every inch of trunk diameter. So if you have a 12-inch tree trunk, then the critical root zone extends 12 feet on one side, 12 feet on the other side. And no construction or disturbance shall occur within an area that constitutes more than 50% of the total critical root zone and 1/2 the radial distance of the critical root zone for each tree being preserved as a protected tree or heritage tree. And I think, again, I haven't had a lot of time to compare what just came out on the business corridor tree part, but I think it's very similar. And what does that do? It protects builders from they're not taking down the tree, but they're cutting right through the root zone, you know, which is basically killing it. And these criteria for critical root zone is well established, as you can remove that amount without you know, a good possibility you're going to kill the tree. An important thing is item number 6. We want to redefine the definition of the city arborist. It's used 13 times in the current residential ordinance to indicate that a city arborist will review, approve, and implement all tree removal permits. Well, number one, it's not really being done. We don't currently have a city arborist, and some are used, you know, apparently periodically for consultations, but we don't have somebody that's doing what the ordinance says they're supposed to be doing as a city arborist. So we're proposing that this be changed to state something in the lines that a city arborist means an ISA certified arborist or an administrator or designated officer of the city appointed by the city council or it could be the city manager to perform the duties of the city arborist when a certified arborist is not available. And that would allow the city to administer the ordinance the way it says in the ordinance. So, and you know, practically speaking, I think Runwood's maybe not a big enough entity to hire a full-time, you know, city arborist to do this work. I don't know, but this gives another way to do it, is to have somebody in the administration designated as or appointed to perform the duties of a city arborist. And I hear we might have a city arborist on staff if they do well in school. Number 7, we want to remove sections D and E of 107-372. Is basically it gives a very involved way that people could replace removed protected trees by placing it on another lot or another place in the city. I think when asking the city staff, I don't think it's ever been used really. It's quite complicated. And we just think we should take that out of the ordinance and because really as much as possible, we think that a tree removed from a lot should be replaced on that lot as much as possible, unless either a variance or a special exception could be obtained. Number 8, removal of a heritage tree would require a separate heritage tree removal permit that could only be approved. Now we're suggesting by a majority vote of the city council, and there are other like Leander, I think Westlake. They're that strict about it. I mean, you can't remove a heritage tree, one of these 24-inch oaks or bigger, without approval of your permit, your heritage tree removal permit, and unless it's been approved. And the idea behind this is to suggest that, you know, maybe there's a way to route your driveway a little bit differently or resite your house a little bit, you know, to save that tree. Right now, you can take out a 27-inch heritage tree and replace it with 3 4-inch trees. 4-inch trees like that. I think that's right. 6. Capped at 6, but yeah, so capped at 6 inches. So if you remove a heritage tree from your buildable area, you only have to replace it with 1 6-inch tree, or you could do 2 3-inch trees, I think. No? Okay. But if it's removed, if a heritage tree is removed from a setback area, then it's supposed to be replaced with 3 trees right now. Maxed at 6 inches. So we're saying that protected trees removed from the buildable area must be replaced by 1 protected tree species. But a replacement of a heritage tree removed from the buildable area with city council or some other entity's approval, must be replaced with one tree 6 inches in diameter or more for every 12 inches in diameter of the removed tree. For example, a 24-inch heritage tree would have to be replaced with two 6-inch diameter trees. Okay. And you know, some people have suggested we go even bigger than that, replace like with like, but it's not practical. I mean, they're trees 6 inches in diameter. They're available. You know, they're expensive, but they're available. But get much bigger than that, they're just not really available. Multi-trunk trees. To determine the diameter of a multi-trunk tree, measure all the trunks, add the total diameter of the largest trunk to half the diameter of each additional trunk at 4.5 feet above natural grade. There is no definition how to take care of multi-trunk trees. What they're doing now, I think, is just measuring each one individually and counting it as 3 trees. But there are some beautiful, beautiful oak trees that are multi-trunk, you know, but each trunk is sizable. And I think in the business corridor language, there's a different way of addressing multi-trunk trees, which we should look at. This is if a protected or heritage tree straddles the boundary between the setback line and the buildable area, it shall be considered removed from the setback area if 25% or more of the trunk diameter is in the setback area. Right now it's 50-50, so if 50% of the tree is in the setback area and 50% in the buildable area, you can just replace it with one tree, considered it in the buildable area. We're saying, and if it's more than 50% is in the setback area, then you have to replace it with three trees. So we're suggesting just give a little bit more. If over 25% is in the setback area, then you need to replace it with 3 trees. Okay, but we're going to change that ratio also, so that comes later. The idea was just there to try to save more trees. Again, this is already the case. An application for a tree removal permit must include a tree survey that shows all the trees that are at least 12 inches in diameter, 4.5 feet above natural grade. And this is not in it. We're suggesting and indicate the critical root zone of these trees as well. Okay. We wanted to insert a state at the very beginning of the section, in the purpose section, that just a general statement that the site plan and project design will preserve the existing natural character of the landscape and retention of protective trees as much as possible. And we realize that that's not really an enforceable thing. It's not a regulation. It's just a strong suggestion, you know, that you take into account that your site plan and project design consider preserving as many of the trees as you can. This would be a fairly major change. Change the maximum number of replacement trees from 7 to unlimited, no matter what the size of the lot. Right now, if you remove, say, 4 protected trees from the front setback, they have to be replaced 3 to 1. So 3 times 4 means you have to replace 12 trees, but it's capped at 7. So if you remove 4 protected trees, you only have to replace 7 with 7 trees. Well, if you remove 10 protected trees, you still only have to replace 7 trees, 7 protected trees. And you know, some lots have a lot of trees that are potentially protectable. So our intention there is to take off that cap at 7. So if you replace 5, if you remove 5 protected trees, and you have to replace it right now. The ordinance would say you'd replace it with, from the setback areas, you replace it with 15 trees. Okay. 16. Development application requirements must include a tree survey indicating the location of all protected and heritage trees together with their critical root zone. A protection plan must be submitted for these trees to include evidence that sufficient care must be demonstrated to ensure survival of these protected trees, including adequate watering before, during, and after construction. And I noticed in the business corridor plan, there's, it's even spelled out even in more detail about how the trees have to be protected before construction, during construction, and after construction. What's happening is some people are, then not take care of it, so it dies off, so that brings up number 17. All replacement trees
Jay,
must, yeah.
I think you missed 15, which is pretty important.
Oh, yes, that's the one I was looking for, thank you. Number 15 has to do with the ratio. It says, change the requirement for replacement of protected trees removed from the setback areas to 2 replacement trees for each removed. So the example I gave you of if you removed 5, under the current ordinance, if you removed 5 protected trees, you would be capped at 7. You don't have to replace 7 trees. 7 replacement trees, okay? So if we remove the cap, then it would go, with the current ordinance, it would be 15 trees, and we think that's kind of excessive. Plus, we're protecting more trees with the heritage trees and the placing the protected trees on versus the setback versus the buildable area, that we think we need to give back some and make this ratio smaller. We would change the requirement for replacement of protected trees removed from the setback areas to 2 replacement trees for each removed. Okay. Okay, so I did
17.
I did 16, 17.
Yeah.
All replacement trees must survive for at least 3 years, and the city arborist or other suitable city employee, as referenced above, shall keep track of these replacements so that at 3 years post-planting, their survival and health can be assessed. That's actually in the ordinance already, but it's probably, I think, not being carried out. And then also, that's where we wanted to, not a certified arborist doesn't have to be involved in that. Somebody else can go out there and look at the trees and see if they're still alive or not. Even I could do that. 18, and we're getting close to the end. These are just not ordinance changes. Section 107-380 requires all vendors doing tree trimming, removal, or demolition to have an annual permit to do so from the city secretary. We just suggested that the city website should be amended or changed so that people can access this list, see who's a permitted tree removal person, and also how tree removal companies could get their permit, which is at no cost, right? They just need to do it. And just to make it easy for people to do that, because it was not intuitively obvious how to do it. 19, the CRCRC strongly supports a program to plant commemorative trees on city property, especially parks, where the cost would come through citizen donations. This program is under consideration, I think, by the Parks Commission. The last question, the third question, was related to that, and the community is like, I don't know, 80-something% said, oh, that's a great idea. But we think that's a little bit more problematic how to do that, and might have to be taken up as a separate issue, and maybe not by our committee, but maybe by a Parks Commission or something like that. The last one is the CRCRC also supports a proposal that was very strongly supported in the survey to consider a plan sponsored by the city or private donations to plant additional trees with owner approval on public right-of-ways. The CRC did not include any proposed changes to the current ordinance to accommodate this idea, and will investigate further the practical and legal ramifications of this idea and maybe present it at a later date. Apparently, there's a lot of things to consider in doing a program like this. That it gets back to the point where the reason why we want to make the progress with the tree, modifying the residential tree ordinance is time is of the essence to save your tree canopy, you know, and I think it's a huge positive for Rollingwood, and I think we'll have to work hard at maintaining our beautiful tree canopy. So we're hoping that these recommendations will do that, or allow us to do that, but without creating what we consider onerous restrictions on people's ability to build the house on their lot. Questions, I guess.
I did want to explain that I'm going to put my CRCRC hat on here for a second. What we had, yes, change hats. We had intended for these recommendations to be brought to P&Z for approval this evening. But once, as Jay had mentioned, we got to look at what the comprehensive plan folks were presenting with regard to the tree ordinance. We saw that, you know, there was a lot of detail in there that surprised us. And in the interest of harmonizing between the residential code and the commercial code, we thought we'd step back and have a little closer look at what the commercial side is proposing to make sure that we haven't missed anything in our recommendations. So what Jay is providing here now is kind of a first read, and for the most part, you'll see this again, but it may have a tweak or two in it based on what we find out with the commercial code. You can appreciate that we are trying to come up with essentially the same set of recommendations as the commercial code, where it makes sense for us to do that. So.
Yeah, there are some things in the commercial code, tree code, that are very specific to the commercial district, but some of them carry over. In fact, they refer to the residential code in several places, so we have to make sure we don't change, you know, that if they were going to refer to something that we're changing, that change makes sense. So, but I think this would be an opportunity to get questions on certain items, and you know, tornado.
Amber alert, or are we all gonna die soon?
No one has power but us, apparently.
Yeah, apparently it's out at my house.
Perfect.
Oh, really?
Let's keep
with-
rolling.
Right, yeah. Let me just add, with all this said, I don't think there's going to be any issue with these, but there is some state law out there. We'll just verify that none of this pushes up against that. I don't think it does, based on my recollection of what the state law says. I think it's mostly about tree mitigation fees, but we'll verify.
Very good, thanks.
Subject to legal review. Got it.
We're just a recommending body, folks, coming up with ideas. So, does anybody have any questions for Jay?
Well, it's really more of a comment. I did attend the last city council meeting where the P&Z's height recommendations were submitted. And I know we had discussed that, and again, it came up this evening, that it was nice, or that, well, somebody mentioned it was nice to have a complete draft of the recommended changes at one time. And the city council, actually, several members at the meeting thought it was better that we are submitting pieces at a time. Mm-hmm. The height ordinance, the tree ordinance, whatever else is coming. And so I just wanted to mention to you all, because we had talked about having one big plan rather than pieces, that the city council actually, and Brooke, Sarah can verify this, that they actually preferred having pieces to discuss. So it's not really a question rather than a comment that I am supportive of looking at these issues individually.
Thank you.
Great. I appreciate that comment. So, anyone else have anything?
I'm so afraid to talk now. I met with Alex on Saturday and got a little insight, I think, into where you guys are on the CRCRC.
Yeah.
And to completely sort of undercut your comment,
Well, it wasn't mine, it was the city council.
Well, I and maybe it's just, you know, who your circle is, but I hear a lot about the opposite of trying to do the CRCRC's work all in one piece. And so I think, you know, at least the constituents that I hear from seem to favor that approach instead of doing things piecemeal. That being said, and I don't want to, I haven't attended the meetings, and so I, don't want to say something wrong, but it sounds like the CRCRC is heading towards maybe just tree lighting and height as being the only real substantive code changes, perhaps.
Well,
Height being the most complicated.
I think when we talk about height, that's one component of maybe bulk. But I think if you want to take the whole thing together and say bulk, lighting, trees, and I think we are going to take a second look at impervious cover and drainage.
Of course, this agenda
we haven't
item is
started
only,
that yet.
of course, this agenda item is only about dealing with the tree recommendations as opposed to the CRCC,
Can we not
CRCC
talk about it,
committee.
or no?
Yeah, it's not agendized.
I think the context that's being brought up is whether this is something to send in a piecemeal fashion or to package it up with the larger thing that's coming.
Okay.
So I would say it fits within that sort of when does it go up aspect of the agenda item.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay. Well, then to that point, okay, I am aware of one council person specifically having mentioned that would like for the CRCRC to deliver all of its recommendations as a single package. I have heard from 3 council members who prefer that it be done individually, particularly whenever you're looking at something like trees, which really does hang by itself, has no impact on any other aspect of our recommendations.
I disagree.
Definitely.
Do you really?
Oh yeah. I mean,
You think
there's
that-
like a critical root zone.
Yeah.
There's so many things about this that impact where
My own
I
house,
could
yeah, I have a
go.
heritage tree that could totally impact where I could build completely, especially when you combine it with tenting, and it's a sloped lot. So like, I completely disagree with that. Like, and that's why, like, from my perspective, I find it very interesting because these things that are happening piecemeal, each one could take away a big chunk of value of my particular property, and in combination could take away like rebuilding in the entirety almost. And so like, I do think looking at things holistically is important because there are flat lots and there are sloped lots and there are quite a few different, terrains in Rollingwood, and some of these in conjunction will have a big effect. Because we have a heritage tree right in our backyard, in the smack dab in the center. So like, I don't know how you would rebuild without impacting almost 50% of the critical root zone.
Well, again, our proposals are not that heritage trees cannot be
Right, that's what I'm saying,
removed.
but with this tree ordinance,
Yeah.
and then combine it with the other couple, you could be really affecting like certain lots.
Yeah, I definitely think a comprehensive approach And I didn't think that what we sent up to city council was a recommendation, but rather a request that they send back to us something to review on height. But I continue to believe that the way all these things play out together is a very important aspect. And it's a little bit about whether city council wants it piecemeal versus package, but I also think it's about the constituents. Because I think that one of the complaints I hear from our residents is that they feel like it's like not a shell game, because that makes it sound like it's nefarious, and I don't think it is. I absolutely believe this comes from the right place, which is like, we see a problem and let's solve it and let's do it expeditiously. And I think that's exactly the right sort of mindset to have about it. But I think that to some extent they feel like, well, I feel like it's like this thing comes up, then this thing comes up, then this, and it's like trying to chase all these things and understand what they are. Whereas if it came together as one package, at least you can say, look, on blank date, June 15th, everything's getting decided. Show up at that city council, or forever hold your peace. Like it's not like a series of things that happened over several times, but the big, you had many opportunities to get input. You could go to the CRCRC, you could come here, but at the end of the day, it's city council that's going to propose things, and you should show up at that meeting.
If you get into the survey and what it said, what people were saying, and people said a lot, and you could get a sense that in certain areas, like trees, the public feels a sense of urgency to have something done soon. And seeing the way that things have played out for the commercial corridor piece, the comprehensive plan, and that it's taken pretty much 3 years to get there, to where we are today. And we weren't ready to approve it this evening. We're still gonna push it back another week. Maybe, and maybe not even then, we don't know. But my point being that we believe that the public has a sense of urgency in taking care of things. We're getting more input on the side of get something done than we are on, oh no, hold it back. Or
I thought
think about it
50% of the survey results said that they thought that the provisions in place were doing a good job.
The provisions on what, the tree ordinance? Well, like Jay had said, yes, they did say that, and then the comments that accompany those same answers, those yes or no answers, say, but I wish I could get more of these trees saved. Or I see an awful lot more trees going down than I thought. Or people who didn't answer the question at all, and we've got the numbers there. They don't answer the question at all with a yes or no. They only have a comment there, and the comments are almost always, there's too many trees coming out. Do I have that right, Jay?
Yes, you do. I mean,
Yeah.
read through all the comments. It only takes a couple hours. It only takes.
I've read it, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and it's very, very highly positive to doing something more to save, especially heritage trees.
So we know, it's unfortunately, it's a kind of a black and white kind of thing. Whenever we talk about, delivering our recommendations, should it all be done together or should it be done piecemeal? We're trying to work on everything at the same time. Some of the work gets completed more quickly than others. We think that the public appetite is for getting things out more quickly, whatever way that is.
My impression is the opposite
Okay.
on this. So I hear you on what you've kind of taken away from your reading of the comments of the
Sure,
surveys
sure.
and the feedback you've gotten. So
You'll recall last meeting, speaking about height and all that, the last P and Z meeting opened up with a gentleman from down the street here who was asking, have you seen what's going up next to me? What are you folks doing about this?
well, and remember, I found that to be a compelling reason for us to send that question up to city council.
Yeah.
So we did. So I'm not
Yeah.
like dogmatically in belief that all of these things have to be done as a package. We sent the height thing up. I just feel like
Yeah,
we've lost the sort of initial
okay.
perimeter of let's go take the CRCRC's ability to take all of the information in from the city,
Uh-huh.
all the residents, meaning not necessarily city council, but like what is it that the people want, and then put that together in a comprehensive package.
Yeah, it's pretty hard.
I bet, and
Yeah.
you guys have been doing a
Yeah,
great
also-
job.
Well, also too, there's whenever the CRCRC was created, I think there was the expectation that it would operate identically to how the comprehensive plan had worked.
Right.
You know.
The super, what was it called? The task force?
The task force, how that worked.
Strike
Yeah.
force. Strike. It was
The strike force, yeah, thank you.
definitely a,
Strike force.
let's
And-
admit, sexier
and-
name, right? I mean, no offense to the CRCRC.
No,
you guys are doing
it-
better, like great work. It's just less branding.
But we thought we would look at the way that they had done things and seeing whether or not we can improve on that. And one of it was to hit it harder, faster. I can tell you this, without getting into names, that originally whenever we first started, I was getting input directly from city council members saying, yeah, put it together as a single package. Then I started getting phone calls that said, when are you gonna put something out? And then we started talking about what we were gonna put out and said, can you put something out every month? What can you do to move this along? And so we started breaking it up. I mean, that was the guidance I'm getting individually, you know, it's from council members is that, you know, you need to move it. Let's go, you know. Houses are coming down, trees are coming down, things are happening. What are you gonna do, you know, and, okay. So here we are. I think it's a good question to take the city, actually, we had tried to take the question to city council a couple of times. How do you wanna see this stuff delivered? How do you wanna see us do this thing? And the response I got back was exactly the way the survey went. Do it to the level of detail that the survey is asking for, had asked, and do it as quickly as you can. So, you know, if I sound defensive, I don't mean to, but we are really, and I hear you whenever you say you want it all delivered in one package, but
It's hard.
if we do that, it will be a while.
Yeah.
It'll
And
be a long time.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
I mean, I have heard from my friends the exact opposite of what you've heard.
Yeah.
And they're saying, let's get things done. Let's protect our trees. Let's protect our neighbors, the ones who are already there. Let's protect our community and don't wait forever. So I don't know who you're hearing from that says slow down, is I'm hearing the opposite. From my neighbors, from my friends, from people that go to the Rollingwood Women's Club, the Rollingwood Book Club. I mean, I don't hear anybody saying slow down. I hear the opposite. I hear people saying, let's get things done now.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. I don't hear anybody saying slow down.
Well,
guess
and
I-
to be
you know-
clear, I don't hear anyone say slow down per se. What I hear is bring it as a package.
I've
Well,
never heard
so-
anybody say that either.
I would say taking it as a package is you're gonna be here till after midnight or all night, which
Yeah.
I can do. I don't have to work tomorrow. But look how long we've been here today, and it's only been really 2 subjects. So
And I think
it's-
actually for the general public, having it in pieces, it's easier to understand.
I think a lot of it's like Michael's point around, you know,
I mean, we've got
risk
somebody
is
sitting
you
right
need to
here.
cumulative
who's-
impacts.
the past.
And
you know,
I understand what
then
you're
circle
saying.
back
Yeah.
and make sure
And I do think
that's it.
I do think that each change does need to be in the context of the others, but I don't know.
I think if you're gonna move forward, you're gonna move forward, or just forget it. You know, take your choice.
There's a practical piece to this too. You know, we're a volunteer organization. And, volunteers don't get paid. And we show up.
What?
Yeah, it hasn't happened unless it's sitting behind the door. But keeping the volunteer group interested in doing what they're doing, I believe, requires that we at least achieve some level of success along the way. That we have to have some wins. We got to get some things out there that people can look at and say yes or no. Send it back to the drawing board or move it forward, but knowing that it's in motion
Oh, I think that's
keeps
what.
is incentivizes
Yeah, that's
the
fair.
continuation.
Yeah.
Other groups, and I'll tell you what, if we don't succeed as a CRCRC, I hope nobody ever has to go out to try to get a citizen committee again, because this is hard stuff, and people see that this is hard stuff, and if they see that it's not. It takes 3 years to get to that next thing. There's not a lot of incentive for you to join that group. When the CRCRC was created, the charter said that we begin on April 1st, 2023 and be finished on October 1st, 2023. Now here we are, and we're just starting to get recommendations out. We're just getting it done, that part.
Well, the task force did this though, right? Like the task force took on the comprehensive change to the commercial code. And then we've got it right here. It looks great. I mean, yes, we pushed it another week.
Yeah.
I would be equally comfortable with it going up. I brought up some questions that I'm still thinking about. I think the thing is, I think it's great that we have an opportunity for continued dialogue. So I don't think that this necessarily is a bad thing that we have this brought to us with this package of things, because this was helpful and I read them and I have multiple comments. I wrote down 8, 7, I can't read my writing. There's multiple things I was oh, that's interesting. I have a question about this. I have a comment about this. So all I was just trying to say is I don't think that this is, we never get a chance to talk as a group.
That's right.
Until right now. And so it's okay, let's talk about it now and send it up to council. I'm I don't think that's the right approach.
I think being a new member here, I see that as the big fallacy of this process is the lack of dialogue among the members as we try to uphold by the Open Meeting Act. And as I mentioned to you at one meeting, we ought to have a workshop,
Yeah.
where we can have a meeting of the minds, hash out the issues, discuss them, instead of waiting once a week and then we have to think out loud here and analyze it. And it's just a fallacy in the process. And so,
Yeah, it's
If
just
we
that's
have
what the
to-
Open Meeting Act requires, though, is that if we want to talk as a group, we have to be
maybe
here.
ask the attorney if we can have a couple people meet with Dave. I've met with him individually.
Nope.
Well, it's a lack of quorum. I mean,
Yeah,
it
don't
was-
do don't do that. Don't do
No.
that.
So,
And Dave, I highly recommend that you not do that.
All right.
Because you will know that you're meeting all with them individually, creating a quorum, which then perhaps you could go to jail for. So
I break no
do not
rules.
recommend that you do that.
I'm as straight as an
I,
arrow.
I had never been in, well, I did go to jail once.
Yeah.
Plead the fifth. Plead the fifth.
No,
right.
no, I have to complete it. I was a teenager and I didn't have a place to sleep for the night, so I was in this town that I was gonna stay the summer in, so I thought, aha, the jail got a cell. So I went in and asked them, could I lay down in your cell and spend the night here rather than my car? And they said, sure. So that was the one time I was in jail. They
Well, I
didn't
do
close the
feel like
door.
we're way off topic.
Yeah, we
from-
are.
Well, but that is the problem. I see, we don't get to hash it out. And it
Well,
takes
let's-
an
why don't-
hour for each little subject. And
Let's do it now. Let's talk about some of these provisions, and then we've got a meeting coming up next week. I don't know if this
Well-
one's on the
I'll tell you
agenda.
what, maybe better, you're on the right track, I think. But since we do have a meeting coming up next week, maybe we can put an agenda item out there. It gives us some freedom to discuss.
Yep.
Can we do that?
Yes.
We can put an agenda item out there that gives us the freedom to speak openly about virtually anything that's going on here.
Well,
And
we
it'll be an
can't, we
agenda
can't,
item.
we can't do that, but we can have an agenda item that talks about process, what you've just been talking about for the last 10 minutes, and how you want things to go forward. We can do that. The agendas have to be specific enough to give the public notice of what you're gonna talk about, so that they can show up if they choose to. So we have to have some specificity.
Well, I prefer subjects and topics and process. I'm still trying to get my head around process, but the topics is what we have concerns about,
I agree.
so.
So my question is, what is the objective of including the process for this agenda item? Are we supposed to do anything about what are we supposed to do with respect to the tree ordinance?
With the
Can we
tree
table it? Can we just?
What
can
we've,
dis-
what we had intended to do originally was to actually get you to approve it, to move up to city council. But given that we know that there are differences between that and the tree portion of the commercial code that has just been presented, we wanted to take that back.
Okay.
Next time Jay's here, you'll be asked to approve or not approve.
I mean, this would give everybody more time to look at what we've presented here and write down all your questions and bring them up the next time we meet. And at that meeting, we can have a revision of these recommendations, incorporating anything that makes it more compatible with the commercial corridor recommendations as far as trees go.
Sure.
And then perhaps we might be able to take a vote on it.
So,
at that
so
time,
consider this a first read, okay? And then, like it says, discussion and possible action regarding tree. Well, we're having discussion. There's not gonna be any possible action tonight.
Okay.
But we can, but as I say, the next time you see Jay, possible action will definitely be on the agenda.
Okay, I don't feel like we did actually discuss the provisions, but
Okay,
that to me would have been a more productive use of the time than if we had just led with, look, I don't think we're gonna send this up to city council today because of our commercial code harmonization that we're gonna try and achieve. But maybe let's tee this up and talk about some of these things like critical root zone, changing the ratios, doing the 25% in the setback, replacing lot loopholes, 24-inch heritage tree definition. I would have been all for spending some time on that. But I think we've kind of tailed out on where we're at. It's approaching 9 o'clock, so maybe it's like, let's discuss it again. But the part that I'm concerned about is like, I want to have the opportunity to talk with us as a group, you know? And like, if you're saying like the next time you see Jay, we're going to be doing action, I'm not sure if I'm going to arrive at that comfort with taking action if we haven't had a chance to yet talk it back through as a group.
okay. Well, then we will put the tree ordinance as presented today, so far, on the agenda for our next meeting.
Okay.
For
That-
discussion.
Yeah, that'd be great. I think
Okay?
that- yeah.
We'll talk about it as much as you like.
And we will not meet at your house to talk about it. Just kidding, I wasn't winky, it was just a joke. Just a joke.
It's social business.
For humor only. No quorum, no quorum, no quorum.
I hear you, and really, I agree, and I think city council shares those same frustrations, just the Open Meetings Act keeps us.
No, and I think it's good, because I think that it's, as they said, the public needs to have an opportunity to come in and tell
Sure.
us what they think about this
Right.
topic that we're gonna
Right,
talk about.
right,
But
right.
there's a lot in here, there's a really big code, like, this ordinance is huge, and so I've got a lot of notes that I'd like to talk through at some
Hey,
point.
could you imagine if we were bringing this, and the tree ordinance is just a piece of it?
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
we
I
would be
mean,
here for a week.
I think though that to Michael's point earlier, I think that's a really helpful thing to keep in mind because as you're starting to piece through all these different pieces that we're putting together, you got to think about, okay, well, for a topo lot, you've just knocked down the height, you've got this other thing, and then, oh, what if there's a heritage tree that's there? Now you've got this 12-foot diameter bubble around it, and now it's like, okay, well, what can you actually build on that lot? And so then you start thinking about all that stuff because it's all at the same time. So I think there's value in it.
All right. Well, we will do that. We have some agenda items that we will put on our next coming meeting, and come ready to discuss. All right.
What about?
Any other questions for Jay before I let him go?
Thank you, Jay. That was
You're
very
welcome.
helpful.
Thank you,
Okay.
Jay.
We'll see you next time.
Very good. All right. All right, we have one final agenda item, and I'm gonna do this really quickly. You have, in your packet, a little flyer here that, or PowerPoint presentation is actually put together by Charlie's group, having to do with the Board of Adjustment and,
The power of the special exception.
the power of the special exception. You know, two P and Z meetings ago, it became apparent that your chair needed more training in P and Z kinds of things. And as it turned out, there was a presentation, a training presentation being put together down in San Antonio by Charlie's group that Friday, that I could go down and attend and spend the day and learn a little more about planning and zoning. About half of it was provided there by Bryce. He was presented.
Was that CLE credit eligible?
No
Could I-
CLE, sir, sorry.
And
Although the UT Land Use Conference
Yeah.
is really good and CLE
It's
eligible.
fascinating.
I-
Next time.
I learned a lot, and I would like to see that presentation be made here as well. I think that we would all benefit from attending, you know, a little bit of training on P and Z and what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do. I would invite the Board of Adjustment to attend with us. One of the things I learned down there, now this was put on for the Alamo Area Government Association. I think it was called.
Alamo Area Council of Governments.
Alamo Area Council of Governments. And there were representatives there from probably a dozen or more different city governments or small town community governments that in the Alamo area. I was the only one from outside of there. And there were about 45 people there in this class. And the presenter, whenever he got to this point, he was another lawyer, I don't recall his name.
Dan Santee, a law partner.
He talked about the Board of Adjustment and about how all these different Board of Adjustments hand out exceptions like candy. That, you know, state law requires that the Board of Adjustment consider exceptions on the basis of hardship.
You're mixing
That's
up special
variance.
exceptions and
Excuse me.
variances.
Yeah.
Well,
This is why that presentation's helpful.
that's right. That's why we have this. So, anyway, our Board of Adjustment is a bit more conservative than what I was hearing about down there. And that it's difficult to get anything done, get anything through our Board of Adjustment. Providing or presenting a hardship is difficult, proving a hardship. So then the discussion gets into special exceptions. And that the Board of Adjustment can grant a special exception provided that the exception is detailed within the code. I'm thinking, aha, this is a great tool. I don't see a lot of special exceptions in our code.
I saw that the proposed commercial corridor includes a new special exception.
You're going to see more of them.
There are,
Yeah.
but that's fairly new stuff. We don't have a lot of it in our current code. And if you had witnessed last week's discussion of building heights, there is an answer to building height that probably covers 80% of everything that needs to be done. And then there's 20 or maybe even less percent that because of the topography of Rolling Woods, that 80% rule doesn't work as well. And so how do you accommodate that? And there's a lot of discussion around that, and it keeps on going. So it's clear that what was presented to you and to city council last week on building height has got to be thought about some more. CRCRC is being asked to get more public input, to make sure that we are listening to what everyone has to say, particularly people who have severely sloped lots. To try to come to some sort of a compromise where necessary, and then consider using special exceptions as a means of being able to accommodate or provide harmony. And if you don't know what a special exception is, you can't do that very well. And so I wanted to bring this little piece up just for y'all to have a look at, study it. There's actually even an example in there that talks about like building heights, and so as an example, you know, that could be handled with a special exception.
Yep.
So I want you and CRCRC, and for that matter, City Council and BOA to understand what a special exception can do for us. And I think that it's a tool that will probably get us a lot closer to what everybody really wants, what the public really wants. So
That's a great
just
idea.
laying it out there.
Yeah.
Okay?
You know,
Appreciate
that is what the city council requested.
Yeah, that's right. But you
And
know,
they took the height, okay, it wasn't I don't know what is the terminology for what we pushed up to the city council. But they did discuss it in detail and made the recommendation that to accommodate the highly sloped lots and different situations, that special exceptions be detailed so that people could get a variance without having to prove a hardship.
not a variance,
Special
a special exception.
Could get-
Well, they could,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry, they could
Yeah.
get it approved from the Board of Adjustment through the special exception process rather than having to prove a hardship.
Yep, I think that's a great idea. Okay, good.
Okay. That's all I had to say.
I'm
about it.
painfully aware of the distinction between special exceptions and variances, having
It
spent
was-
years of study on the
Yeah,
subject,
it
actually.
was interesting to me, and having reviewed the height discussion, which lasted about an hour and 42 minutes, as I recall. In reviewing the height discussion, it became clear, well, Charlie needed to step in and actually explain the differences between variances and special exceptions.
Mhm.
And to city council members so that they could get an idea. And so that really kind of drove the conversation that Jeannie had just talked about.
Well,
Um,
the city council, I do want to say that the city council is amazing.
They are.
I thought that,
yeah.
I thought that the discussion that you all undertook was incredibly enlightening and very lucid and very rational. And I was thinking, I like this city council.
Me too. Very good. That's all I had to say about it. Anybody have a motion?
I'll move to adjourn.
Okay.
Well,
You got a
what about-
second?
Second.
All right.
Maybe
All
we
in
can get
favor?
home before it
Aye.
rains again.
Okay, 9 o'clock. We'll adjourn this meeting.